I was on Facebook posted my name on it, saying all these crazy things now. I'll call. I'll get people calling about.
I think we should get
application,
going.
But never like two towns at the same time.
And
Yeah, Mr. Kelly has to get up for work tomorrow. I forgot.
so, we are up to
20-something, let me see, it was paid, well, paid.
the most recent document.
Yeah, do we start with storage? Let me just see here.
Well,
12 was the biggie. Ordinance recommendations, that was it, yeah. Which is page 5. on my printout. I think it was ordinance recommendations. Yeah, that's where we all started from last time, the writing starts.
yeah, I think these are all things that we've talked about,
Yeah,
that we kind of agree on, and I think Chris has captured them pretty well, unless anybody has anything that they
right.
noticed or wanted to add.
And then 12 under that is where proliferation of large warehouses
Right.
starts, and that's.
Yeah.
I've got that at 17 is the warehouses.
Let me see, that's. Yeah,
Yes.
that's a new number, okay.
Yes,
17
17.
was last week, last month. 12 was last.
Shortly, yeah. But everything up to that, the only thing that well, I guess it doesn't fit under 7, actually. So do we have any changes or questions about 6 through 16?
No, look fine to me, anyway.
Yeah, those things are, we're kind of in agreement on, and they're well reflected. Oh, okay. The warehouse 17, I thought personally all those things that we had talked about were well incorporated in this.
The sliding scale.
Yes. About setbacks, but also, the sliding scale, you're talking about storage areas or where there's
The
warehouses?
size of the warehouse based on the acreage.
Yeah,
And then we went with the floating zone thing, which
yes,
I really like that idea.
the acreage, are we talking about,
Well, the warehouses, what I have said in here is it's a sliding scale based on the size of the warehouse. The bigger the warehouse, the greater the setback required, as well as the wider buffer area around the perimeter of the property being required.
right, but there's
There's no acreage.
There's
size.
no
There would be,
acreage sliding
the
scale.
recommendation here would be a conditional use standard would be a minimum 10-acre property for a larger warehouse. And don't get into too many specifics here, but what we did in West End and we've done in a few other towns is this sliding scale kind of kicks in for warehouses above a certain size, so that a 10,000 square foot warehouse is still kind of considered like any other light industrial use, because that's not bringing in 300 trucks a day and taking up 40 acres of space. Whereas a 300,000 square foot warehouse or a 1,000,000 square foot warehouse gets treated quite differently.
Yes, okay, so that, the only thing that occurred to me that we didn't really talk about was, I don't know how easy it is to add, the idea of electric vehicles, if there's a distribution center, encouraging that. That is one of the
Sure.
recommendations
And
from the
frankly,
state.
we did do that in West Hampton. In their ordinance, it's a design standard, not a zoning standards. It's, the technology, I don't think is quite there yet to absolutely require it, but certainly state law already requires electric vehicle charging stations for regular passenger vehicles. And we did put in a provision in West Hampton that had to provide something like, it's either 10% or 15% of their truck loading bays or truck parking stalls should be equipped to be electric vehicle charging stations as well, in the event that 10 years down the line, the fleet of trucks are electric trucks instead of diesel.
So.
Yeah, we can certainly include
You
that
can
in
add
there.
that.
If that's what the committee wants to see, I can include that in there.
What's everybody's thought on that? We didn't talk about that at the last meeting, but
Guess we could, I mean.
that seems
Well,
like the
I mean,
confusion.
is it required if it's already a state requirement?
State requirement is just for passenger vehicles,
Right, it doesn't apply.
not for freight trucks.
Okay.
What about plugging in refrigerated trucks? That was part of the state guideline when they come to load and unload, so they're not idling.
certainly
That
include
would
that as
be-
well.
That would be good.
That would really improve air
Yeah.
quality.
Chris, let me ask you, you said you did a similar thing in West Hampton. So did you require them, those things on the larger square footage facilities? Because I just don't see a tractor trailer being electric. I mean, some of these last stop,
I mean, I believe Tesla is testing
are
some,
making them.
it's not, clearly the technology is not as advanced as it is for, regular passenger vehicles, but there are some out there. I think the biggest issue with them right now is that, the batteries they need are pretty large, and then the distance they can travel is not nearly as far as a diesel, so the amount of times they need to stop and recharge if they're traveling from, say the port in Los Angeles and trying to go to Chicago, they might have to recharge 15, 20 times, where a diesel truck only has to refuel a
Right.
couple of times.
right, I mean, that's what I mean, like, so some of these smaller, like last stop type places that use these Amazon or Prime panel trucks, I see them, I know them, I see them in Philadelphia all the time, they're electric. So that would make sense for these smaller warehouses, but for these large, 500,000 feet and above, I don't see how they would even be utilized.
Well, what we put in the ordinance in West Hampton, and again, it's a design standard, so the burden of proof for an applicant to say, we don't really need these right now is pretty low, is that the infrastructure just needs to be there. They don't actually have to have full stations just yet.
Okay.
It needs to be, that it's in the event of the future that they do move to electric, which I know they're, with everything, the market is moving that way. Whether that happens in 5 years or 20 years or not at all, I don't know, I can't say. That's a little bit beyond my area of expertise. But it's just that the infrastructure is there, the capability to install charging stations is there, that they don't have to do as much ripping up of asphalt and concrete and laying the groundwork for the electric charging stations in the future, that they just go and install them.
I do
Also-
like the plugging in refrigerated trucks though. That one I like.
And it seemed to me that some of these distribution facilities that are the end, that from which the local deliveries are made, are pretty big too. They're not all smaller warehouses.
Well, they're smaller than these mega,
Oh, yeah.
they're much smaller.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're not a million square feet, but, that's where particularly the electric charging
No, that's
station.
what, yeah, that's what I was saying, yeah, for those smaller type places, I absolutely see why they would be needed, but these larger ones that require the bigger trucks that keep coming in and out, I just
Yeah.
don't see that as ever being used, not in the immediate future.
Not in the immediate future, but it doesn't hurt to, as you say, put in the infrastructure to allow it.
Mhm.
Okay,
The smaller warehouses are known as last mile.
yes, that's one name for them, I forget what the others are, the state used some other
They're last mile fulfillment centers usually.
fulfillment centers, sorry.
I can't do that too.
I wanted to bring something up about, one of the goals of the master plan was to protect water quality. And I know you have said that you wanted to protect, preserve lands that are contiguous. And I think you want to preserve wetlands, but what I didn't hear is that we should also be preserving forested lands with high groundwater recharge. Because that's important for our future, that we have enough quality water, and the only way to get that is filtration through those, usually upland forests that have the high groundwater recharge. And we should try to protect and preserve those as well, not just wetlands, because wetlands already have some level of protection, but these areas have none, and they're important to us as a community.
I could easily add that as another goal or sub-goal within the list. Another thing I can say to that is one of the recommendations in here is that the township update their open space and recreation plan and conservation plan element of the master plan, which then would have these specific recommendations of targeting exactly which properties are, prioritized for preservation versus, what should be available for development.
It would just be nice if it was actually in this master plan that we wanted to try to preserve forested lands, especially the older forests,
Mature trees.
the mature forests that we
Well,
have.
let me ask you a question. You wanna preserve forests, you wanna preserve farmland, you wanna preserve wetlands. Is there any lands that you don't wanna preserve that you would be open to developing? Or-
Well, I'm not against development per se, but
As
we're
long as
just
they're not
not
over land,
saving
right? I
any,
mean,
we're not really saving any forested lands. The only forested land that's getting saved right now is due to private, efforts that the town has, I think, voted last night to put some money into it, like 15,000. So I think we fall way short of preserving those areas that are gonna keep our groundwater clean. I'm not saying we have to save every upland forest, but we should make an attempt to not just say, hey, let's preserve all the farmland, but also say, let's make a really good effort to also preserve, you know, older forests.
I think we have it on goal 6, assumption 6 and goal 6. I mean, we could just throw in the word forested areas.
Yeah.
Like B, continue to pursue protections including open space and forest preservation, we could just throw it in there. And it would-
That's where I think it belongs, and I agree with you.
I was just gonna say, with Jason absent from the last meeting and no one here to speak up for the development community, we did basically decide that there shall be no development ever again in Franklin Township.
I was gonna say, yeah, it's the direction we're going.
Unless, of course, somebody makes a sizable donation to the school system.
Okay,
That's all
yeah.
done.
There you go, and the findings.
Where's that written down? We need that.
Well,
There's space on the moon.
that one's off the record, because I don't think it would be legal to say.
Chris, I'm sorry, I was having a hard time hearing. The running of diesel, what are we talking about? That is the refrigeration unit only, or is it the tractor the truck that pulls it? What are
I
you
think
talking
it's
about
both.
not running?
I believe the refrigerated trucks are linked to the diesel engine on the truck itself is what runs the refrigerator for the,
I thought it was a separately.
Yeah, it actually is a separate generator on the,
but my understanding is that if they do want to, if they're not, if they get to the facility and they're not ready to go actually, dock and unload, they do, sometimes if it's a refrigerated truck, they'll sit and idle in order to maintain the refrigeration.
Right, and that's where I'm headed. I have no problem with shutting the diesel motor of the truck down. But to say that they have to hook to electric, one, I don't even know if that exists. If it does exist, does it exist on all the refrigeration units? We can't tell somebody to shut a refrigeration unit down when there's no alternative as in plugging it in. So if we're talking about the tractor itself, I'm fine with shutting that down. But I don't know that we can dictate to shut down a refrigeration unit that the only source of running is the motor itself, and you can't hook electric to it.
I think all we're getting at here is there would be a requirement for any storage facility that would be cold storage. A regular bulk storage isn't taking frozen goods anyway, but if it's cold storage, that they have the ability, that there is some provisions in there so the trucks don't have to idle to.
Right.
Whether
Okay,
that's
the
electric
provision
plug-in
to
or
have
something.
to plug it in if you can plug it in,
Yeah.
I'm perfectly fine with. But to tell them that they can't run the unit and then spoil a tractor trailer load
No,
of product because.
Yeah, this wouldn't be, at least not in a zoning ordinance, it wouldn't be telling you how to operate your
Right,
facility.
exactly.
And frankly, there might be state regulations in terms of how long a truck is allowed to idle. I believe there is.
Where would these outlets be, in each loading dock?
Yeah,
Possibly in a loading dock, possibly outside. I mean, same with the passenger cars now, they usually put the electric vehicle charging stations at the periphery of the parking lot. It could be similar to that. I don't really know. That would be something that would be determined at an actual site plan hearing of, that, the developer would have to explain what they're doing, that if they're a cold storage facility, this is how, if trucks are coming and we don't have a dock open for them, or they're queuing because sometimes the
they're
security gate
stacking.
takes a few minutes to clear one truck to let one in, so if you said, how are you handling that so you don't have trucks just idling for half an hour?
yeah, I think the state guidance talks about when they're docked at the loading dock. I think that's where they're,
There's, the state guidance is about warehouses in general, but I believe there are state regulations about diesel trucks overall in terms of how long they're allowed to idle. It might have something to do with how close you are to a residence. So I do recall this issue coming up a lot many years ago when I was in the planner in Newark, and there was the port there, and then historic residences immediately adjacent to that, so they had diesel trucks coming and going all the time. So it was an issue that was brought up very regularly, and I do believe there are some state regulations on that, regardless of what the township will put in their ordinance.
There are for not idling your car at a convenience store or something like that. You can't do it.
5 minutes, I think, at the Wawa, I think.
It applies to passenger cars.
Yeah.
How regularly that gets enforced, I have no idea, but.
That's why I laughed.
Right.
Chris, the next piece is the definition of words. We're talking about warehousing, and obviously you're talking over 100,000 feet and all that type of stuff. If I was to build a 5,000 or 10,000 square foot warehouse, and that's what I'm calling it, a warehouse, is there a difference between a local business building a warehouse, 5,000, 10,000 square feet for storage, and the definition of a warehouse here. I don't wanna see a local business trying to build a 5,000 or 10,000 square foot warehouse, fall in the same category as somebody's building a 500,000 square foot warehouse. And is there a definition somewhere that would separate the two?
What I think we would do, but it's not spelled out specifically in here, and maybe we can discuss this for a few minutes of what you want that trigger to be, what that size is that this floating zone and conditional use standards would be for warehouses of a certain size. And is it 50,000 square feet that triggers that? Is it 100,000 square feet? So that, yeah, like I said before, like you just said, that somebody wants to build 5,000 square feet of storage space, either as their primary business or as accessory to an existing business.
It's a warehouse.
And it's still, you can call it a warehouse, but it's not triggering all of these
All
requirements.
of these requirements.
It's something that clearly is not gonna have the same impact as Amazon coming in with
500,000.
500,000 or 1.3 million square feet of warehouse space and 150, 200 trucks coming in and out. That be distinguished in the code that's permitted the same way they are right now as any other light industrial use really. My suggestion would be maybe 50,000 square feet triggers that. Is there okay
I'm
with
fine with that. As long as we're protecting a local business, and not putting them through, now, if they're building a 500,000 square feet, they're building a 500,000 square feet, and they fall by the guidelines, but I don't want a 10,000 or 20,000 square foot warehouse falling under the same requirements, being held to the same 10 acres and all that type of stuff.
Does anybody have a sense of what our storage places now are, like,
Leo.
Fiore, Leo, the ones on Grand Avenue?
Well,
that-
Leo's bigger than 50.
Yeah, he definitely would fall on the warehouse side,
He's
but the
a couple
floor,
hundred,
those type of businesses.
Yeah, I mean, he's.
Yeah, all the rest of them are nowhere near.
Yeah, I mean, he's gotta be a couple 100,000 square feet, easy.
How big do you think Fiore is and all them?
That's
That's like-
50, that's not even 50.
5,000,
20,000.
5,000. You're talking about this guy, don't Belsey?
Yeah.
If you were,
Yeah, that's a couple
he's-
thousand.
Yeah, 5,000.
If I recall, they just came in for a site plan
Yeah.
approval last year, and I think their building is something like maybe not even 10,000 square feet.
I think it's probably half of that, it's not even.
It's not very big, the property itself is only a few acres.
I'm trying to think of
I've
others.
had customers build 50,000 square feet buildings in Pure Land, and they're dwarfed.
Is
compared to
Falciani the
houses.
one?
50
But
million.
in Franklin, it might look big,
No,
that's what I'm
that-
saying.
50,000
like,
square
they're-
foot building is not big. So-
What about the one by the Liberty Bell, isn't that Falciani or something? Behind the Liberty Bell Tavern?
What's the question?
What's the
Falciani,
size of that?
Neil's place.
Empty
Basket
bushels.
place, Neil's place.
Yeah. I don't think that's that large either.
I
Okay.
don't think
So 50,000 is what we agreed
so. I
to?
would say,
Yeah,
Greater than
Yeah.
50,000.
Yes.
Right. Greater than.
So 50,000
Just
is one.
50,000 is.
Right.
Right.
50,001, he said.
Right.
Well, 50,001 square inch,
yeah.
Yeah, there you go.
and we will measure
So
at least twice.
just back to the goal 6, did we agree that we're going to just add in continue to pursue protections, including open space preservation on lands that contribute to water quality in the township, such as those within or adjacent to wetlands, on environmentally sensitive lands, or areas contiguous to other preserved open spaces? And we could add it right into that sentence.
Open space or forest preservation?
High recharge forested land?
I don't even think you need it if you just say continue to pursue protections, including open space and forest preservation on lands that blah blah. Because the rest of it talks about water quality and.
Okay, it just seems,
And forest would be environmentally sensitive land, forest.
well,
It isn't dire.
it isn't treated, it isn't protected though.
Yeah.
By, in the same way
I
that
think
they.
it certainly doesn't hurt to specifically say high recharge areas of mature forest.
Yeah.
Right, if you look at the actual water recharge rate of our state, the highest in our state is Malaga. It runs from over at Elmer through Malaga into the Pinelands, 11 to 13 inches annually. That's documented as that we are the highest in the state of our water recharge for our fresh drinking water. That's on the maps. So if you want to protect an area, there's your area.
Yeah, see, I just thought that putting in high recharge forested land was a good idea, if you, because then you're not talking about all forested land, although personally, I'd like to preserve every forest, big or small, because birds depend on them and I'm
You
not.
can do that if you buy it all yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm
Working
willing,
on
but
it.
see, people aren't willing to sell it
So-
for a reasonable
Okay.
cost. I'm not willing to do it personally, but my land trust would. So did we agree on what we're saying here?
High recharge forested lands, is that what the term is?
Yeah, I don't know that we need to put that in, as you said, but
It certainly doesn't hurt to be slightly more specific than just
Please,
forest
right,
lands.
please.
okay. So we're on to, are we done with warehouses?
I just have one question on the warehouses, because I wasn't here, and I don't wanna take up much time, but regarding the 1,000-foot setback, from schools or residences, this measure building to building, would that include in situations where you had intermittent development between those two structures? Like, would you contemplate that, or
What do you
if
mean
you
by
have a
intermittent
home on one side of 55, and you build a warehouse on the other side, you still have to be 1,000 feet from that house, even though there's an interstate highway between you and that house? So that was my question. Or, if there's another commercial building between you and this house or school,
I think Chris's language is clear and it's stated from building to building.
well, I understand that, but I'm saying if there's intermittent development between those 2 points, is that still applicable?
If that's what the committee wants, I can draft language in there to that effect, and not regarding warehouses, but in Mount Laurel for cannabis businesses, they did just that, where there was 1,000-foot provision of the setbacks and 500 feet from residences, churches, schools, and then they said, okay, well, if you're separated by a state highway that has a median, then your distance only can be cut in half or something like that. So that sort of language can be put in there, but at the same time, in the instance that comes up, I would see that as being a mitigating factor in terms of if any developer wants to build a 500,000 square foot warehouse, and they meet all these criteria except for there is a house that is 750 feet away, but it's across 55, that would be a decent justification for the going to the zoning board and getting a conditional use variance. I don't know that we need to spell out every possible circumstance in the ordinance itself, but if the committee wants, it's not that difficult to draft such language. If you think being separated by a divided highway
I just use that as an example, but,
appropriate mitigating factor.
I think case by case would work better than trying to guess,
I think we ought to be accurate on it, because putting the builder hat on for the moment, where are you going to build a warehouse? And it's going to be near an interstate, so you're not going to build it out in the Pioneer Hollow area because you don't have highway access. So if the separation is going to take place, if the probability of separation to take place is going to take place at the interchanges of the state highways, that would be the most probable place to see warehousing.
I mean, you essentially, I haven't studied it, but I'm assuming with that requirement, you preclude just about every site within Franklin Township. So is that the goal, or?
I don't know if it's every site. I can't say that I've done an actual study to measure every residence and the
Right.
distance from those.
I don't really have an opinion one way or the other. If that's the goal, that's fine, but that's essentially what we're doing by putting that 1,000-foot requirement in there. So,
The floating zone itself is sort of, to not make it easy.
well, yeah, if that's the purpose to preclude them, then that's fine. I just didn't know if that was the purpose, so.
was last month.
That was all. I had no further comment from it.
No opinion one way or the other on that one.
Jason, I was reading one
Well,
of
they
the, I
really
just
are.
found it.
Number under
Yeah,
page
C.
9,
See,
C, yeah.
Or, yeah, C, 17C. Well, I don't know whether we're trying to necessarily completely eliminate the possibility, but there really aren't very many places that make sense that are anywhere near interchanges. But there might be something that happens out, well, aren't we gonna come up on something where we're talking about Meredith Farms?
Yeah,
Yeah, there could be something, say, out that way, which
which is on state highway.
is on a state highway.
Like, yeah, Meredith Farm should be excluded from all these regulations, I would think. I mean, that's the,
Well,
It's
there's
a
already a
redevelopment
developer's
zone.
agreement to build something there. I don't know if or when it's gonna happen, but there already is a developer's agreement for a
I guess that
particular.
that would override any underlying zoning anyway.
Yeah, yeah.
It's a redeveloper's agreement.
I don't think a developer's agreement would supersede any zoning, but right now we have no plans to change the zoning on that property.
So,
Right.
and it wouldn't, so if it does change, it would affect it, so, but there's no plans to change
And
it,
even
so.
if the floating zone is an overlay zone, so it wouldn't change any underlying
underlying.
zoning on the property.
Going back to Jason's point, the more are we getting to a point where we're excluding it, with that 1,000-foot, within a,
Well, I think you're including, you're doing conditions, so, right, that was the goal last month, that was discussed, that doing the floating zone and adding conditional, conditions on there also, to make it a little bit more, you know, that this falls into the proper area. I mean, they could always apply for variance, relief or whatever the case is, and look at it on a case-by-case basis.
case-by-case basis?
And I was asked to, look at, I guess, any potential litigation. I know that somebody in the audience, had asked about whether or not there had been, you know, cases where, developers filed
Showed up
a
at the right
lawsuit. Yeah, you've seen, and they had, and I did find, that there were cases where, a developer or other, you know, individuals who had a vested interest in property had sued, a municipality for, completely trying to block them from being able to build a warehouse. But, you know, it's appropriate for, conditions to be, imposed and to have like a floating, you know, so what you're doing, you know, since you already also have an area that's designated warehouse, at this point, you're just, changing it to a now floating zone, adding more conditional use, that would be, safer or more conservative than completely eliminating and saying no warehouse is allowed anywhere in the township, so, and that was the.
No, you wouldn't say no warehouses, you would just have in each
Well, I
zone.
mean, that's the goal of, the goal of having the floating zone and having these conditions imposed upon where these warehouses can be built, does limit their ability to kind of go, and then again, they could ask for a variance or variance relief on a case-by-case, basis, and that would have to be reviewed, at that time.
I think my position is that 1,000 feet is essentially prohibiting any development of these warehouses in Franklin Township. If you can find me a site in Franklin Township where you can put a 50,000 or greater square foot warehouse and meet the 1,000 feet condition, then I stand corrected. But I would gamble a little bit of money right now that site doesn't exist.
No, I agree.
Yeah.
1,000 feet is close to 2/10 of a mile.
Do you wanna change that?
There's multiple things we can do here. We can change it that if the residence or school is separated by a state highway, either Route 40 or 455 would be that, then that either reduces it or eliminates that factor altogether, or we can reduce that 1,000 feet to 500 feet or, you know, whatever number you think is more
Well, and
appropriate.
that's where my thought is to put a split in here. I have no objections of keeping it 1,000 feet away from the schools. So, yeah, that, to me, I'm perfectly fine with that. And within 500 foot of a resident building to building.
We're having 1,000-foot resident and 500 foot of another commercial building. You're gonna, you know, I mean, that's what the original plan should have been in our town, but it never was to keep, you know, commercial businesses together and residential businesses together, but we're way past that now. We've got residences mixed all through business. But if you're gonna try to protect the residents, which is, I mean, that's really what you should be doing. Why not have the requirements on a residence, but yet on a business, they can be closer?
500 seems reasonable.
And just real quick as a point of clarification, so I'm just looking on Google Maps, so don't trust me, trust Google Maps. But the redevelopment zone area in Malaga, so the cleared portion, looking at, again, 1,000 feet, doesn't seem like the cleared portion would meet those recommendations. But the other side of 55, that's all woods. And that's 6,000, 7,000 feet away from any kind of residential development, any development whatsoever. So that would open up that portion. So there are areas in the township where development would be able to be built.
Well, I disagree with you on that measurement. I mean, there's houses
Well-
all around that
Oh, yeah.
property. There's a guy that sells the pallets, he lives there. If you go across 55, that's Cindy's development, there's tons of houses across
No,
That's
55.
his development.
I'm talking about on the, so if you're looking Can I just show you real quick?
Yeah, are you saying the south side or? the
Yeah,
north
no,
side?
I'm talking, so the other side, so not the, so here. So all this wood here, that's 1,000 feet, and that's 55, sorry.
Go back.
And that's 50, so this is 1,000 feet.
What woods are you referring to?
This was all part of the redevelopment zone.
Yeah, there's a house right there.
Are you talking about the formerly proposed redevelopment area at the
Yeah,
intersection?
the formerly
465?
proposed,
Okay,
yeah.
so.
So I just went,
not
so
actually
1,000 feet,
designated redevelopment.
I'm just trying to, to just bring some clarity to it.
There, right, you don't see to the right of the Dollar General, there's a house right there. Guy lives there, right here, he sells,
Right there.
yeah, by the creek.
Well, that's like right around 1,000 feet. Now, would the, this is just a question, would the entrance also be included as part of the 1,000 feet setback, or just the building, the structure?
Well,
alone?
this is the
Right now, we're
building,
building to building.
So actual
Building to
wall of the building to the wall of the residence.
So there's plenty of room for buildings, it's just there would be an entrance that might be closer to a residential home then.
But that's just that location.
Yeah.
I think what Jason's talking about, the areas, the State Highway 40, 47, places like that, where these potential buildings could be built, there's houses all up and down there. So you're kind of precluding those two roads by mandating 1,000 feet.
But why is that a bad thing? I mean, residents.
No,
are
I'm not
paying
saying,
taxes
I'm not saying it's
on
a
those
bad,
roads.
I didn't say it's a bad thing. I just think 1,000 feet's kind of, it's 2/10 of a mile.
Why is it a good thing?
yeah, I mean, it's just a difference of opinion, it's not bad or good, it's
You
like,
know, even if,
we're gonna
let's
prohibit
say,
them, or we're gonna encourage them, or we're gonna fall somewhere in the middle.
Again, I think that this whole concept of warehousing, I mean, the only real place that we have to worry about some major warehouse coming is that Fazio property.
Right.
There is nowhere else in this township that somebody's gonna build a
That's
major
feasible,
warehouse.
from
They're just not,
transportation standpoint.
because an investor will not put that kind of money anywhere else but that location. Because he won't get a buyer or a renter, because it's too difficult to get in and out of everywhere else. It's just an efficiency factor, that's all it really is. So yeah, is there potential for a major warehouse to be built in Fazio? Absolutely. Anywhere else? I
It's a
don't see it.
high charge area.
it's a high recharge area, exactly.
Well, but that's the only exposure that we really have to one of these major buildings.
What about the lot almost on Route 40, as you're leaving the town, going towards the Delaware Memorial Bridge, on the right, last thing, that's always been for sale, there's a big field there. Past the,
After Porchtown Road.
exactly, there's a big lot there, that's pretty close to 40 as well.
And that's not a preserve.
That's not big
No.
enough for a warehouse.
Yeah,
Nah,
that's-
it's maybe 8 acres.
Maybe
Is it only
retail.
8 acres?
No.
Because
Doesn't appear to
Fazio's
be
what,
much larger.
30,
That's not-
40 maybe? How big is the Fazio?
Probably even bigger than that.
I think it's
I don't
50.
recall off
Is
the
it
top of my head,
50?
I wanna say at least 40 or 50 acres.
Yeah.
Fazio's almost 50.
I mean, well, again, these are all value judgments that, ladies and gentlemen, were put on the board to decide, to see what the residents are most concerned about. I just personally, not to take up any more time, but I appreciate the comments that you've stated so far. And, if our main goal is keeping the township as rural as possible, while encouraging smart growth and development, which is important, these are all things to take into context. That's all. That's my 2 cents.
It might be hard to even, get very far from houses on the Fazio property.
Yeah, there's 3 or 4 houses on the east side of
Get
that
that cleared
property.
outside won't be.
And there's a lot of, across the Route 40. Route 40 is only 66-foot right away. It's not that big.
So maybe then the 500, again, leave the 1,000 for schools and 500 for residences would just
Yeah.
make more sense in this
Yes.
town.
Yeah, put 500
It's
for
either
resident,
that or-
1,000 for schools.
Or spell out
Are we just talking
state,
about
if there's a
warehouse?
state highway,
Yeah.
state road.
If that were in the form of a motion, I would second it.
Okay, well, we have a motion. Will somebody make a motion to that?
Yes, you just did.
I guess
Yes,
I just did.
500 for the resident and 1,000 for schools.
What's the difference?
Building to building.
Building to building, yes.
So all in favor of 500 versus 1,000?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Well, we're not following Robert's
I'd
rules of
rather
orders
have
here,
a
so you
thousand
guys can all
for
try and vote if you want to and see if they listen to you.
Yeah, no,
Yeah, I think that's easier. That's how I
have
feel.
to, I mean,
So we've
building
got-
Yeah, but building to building is one thing, I mean, you've still got
Alright.
property
Next-
line,
next
you
item.
know, there's no distance to property line.
Well, there would be enhanced setbacks,
And for residents.
as well enhanced buffers and enhanced setbacks based on the size of the warehouse.
Next item.
Property line setback,
Okay,
this would be even further than that.
anything else on warehouses, are we done now? I think we're done, okay, so 18, update the code, have a moratorium on road openings.
We discussed it.
Yeah, we talked
Okay,
about
did we
that.
discuss? I forgot.
Yeah, this, I included the directional boarding requirement as well in the partnership.
Oh, right, okay.
Was that, we were gonna add an appeal, process to the township committee, is that,
Yes.
okay.
And 19, definitions of lot lines and yards, we discussed that too, didn't we? Yeah.
Thought you did.
Clarified about front yards versus, yeah, and I thought we also dealt with the fence issue, that's later, right? Okay, 20, design standards for subdivisions. The business about, the depth of the lot should not exceed 2.5 times the width.
Didn't we wanna override that?
Yeah, I mean, we already have 1 million lots like that, where
We
they
always,
go way far back, I don't know
It's always
how,
a
we've
request
never
for
denied
waiver.
it,
Yeah,
Yeah, it's always been granted, right?
yeah.
but it seems silly to keep
but
it
it's
in there if
it's silly to
that's
keep it and have to ask for that waiver each time.
every time, right?
Because you know we're gonna grant it because of the shape of the lot, so why put them through the process?
So we need to strike that sentence. The width to frontage, or the width to length ratio is stricken.
Or we could amend the lot size to match the 2.5 times the frontage requirement,
You know, then the frontage.
amend the lot size.
I think the easiest, in my opinion, is just simply delete that requirement. But if you're meeting the minimum lot frontage and lot area, there's really not a great reason to have a proportional standard. That makes sense for smaller lots in a major subdivision that you want most of it to be roughly your.
It's another requirement, you can't do
Right.
that, it's an unbeatable requirement when you look at the frontage.
But there's a lot of properties in this town that do have 300 feet of frontage and 2,000 feet of depth.
Yeah, right.
And
Yeah, but
sometimes
if you
people
just, what I'm
subdivide
saying,
and
if
it's
you
not
make a
always
conforming
working.
lot with the minimum requirements of 1.5 acres and 150 foot frontage, that doesn't comply with the 2.5 times ratio.
Yeah, that's why
That's
we're
why
saying
you have to get a
just
waiver
remove
every
that
single time.
Right.
requirement.
So eliminating the 2.5 times
The ratio.
ratio takes care of that.
Yep.
Okay, so we agree on that.
Yes.
Buffer requirements between residential uses and non-residential uses should be enhanced and enforced through subdivision and or site plan review where current code already requires them. The current code provides a provision stating that the reviewing board may waive buffer requirements if impractical. This provision is unnecessary as both the zoning board and the planning board already have the authority to grant variances and waivers from bulk standards and design standards where justified.
What about removing that part of the ordinance that says, oh, you can just put a fence in? Can we just make that
Well,
a waiver
That's
or a
fine.
variance?
It doesn't quite say exactly that, it just says that in lieu of other circumstances where impractical, the board may waive the buffering requirements. It doesn't specifically say that if you put a fence in, it's automatically waived. What I'm saying is if you got a buffer standard, just leave it as a buffer standard. You don't have to have anything in the code that says the board may waive this provision. Because if the code says the board may waive it, that's almost giving a developer justification to just come in and say, can we just get this waived, as opposed to having to justify why they want it waived. The planning board and zoning board already have the authority to do anything that's not triggering a D variance. Either board has the authority to waive that requirement, provided that the applicant provides sufficient justifications to satisfy you. So it doesn't need to be stated specifically that the board may waive it, because they already have that authority.
We already have
It's
that
land use
authority.
law.
Right.
Can you
and
pull
it
that
just-
up? Because I'm pretty sure it says or a fence.
No, that's the old version.
That's not in there
Yeah.
today?
No, the last month it said it, this month it doesn't.
Oh,
In the
but she's just talking about the actual
253,
code
right,
itself.
253.
I did look it up, and
itself.
it doesn't specifically say that a fence triggers automatic waiver of buffering requirements. It says that, I think it says under certain circumstances where providing the full buffer is impractical, board may require a fence in lieu of the buffer. Something along those lines. So it doesn't just say if you put up a fence, you don't have to do a buffer. It's not as cut and dry as that. So basically, I'm saying that the buffer requirement should be the buffer requirement, and if somebody wants to put up a fence, that can be viewed by the board as a possible mitigating factor and possible justification for a variance, but it shouldn't be something that automatically gives them the right to remove a buffer. So I'm on the same page as you, but I think the ordinance isn't worded exactly the way that you think it is.
I'll have to look at it again.
So we're all in agreement on that?
Yeah, take
Yeah,
out,
well, it's
take
in the
out that,
buffer requirements.
yeah, especially because it encourages an applicant to come in and automatically.
253, it might be in the,
Oh, there's a buffer section itself.
probably. If it's anywhere, it's probably in there. There's a few things in this code that are just not in the place you would expect them to be.
Yeah, it's under buffers, I think.
Okay, landscaping requirements is 22.
Here's your chance to shine, Jimmy.
For new subdivisions, the site plans should be reviewed and enhanced in order to provide for attractive new developments that improve the community. Substantial landscaping and planting should be required to complement new buildings, with an emphasis on requiring native species of plants that are suited to thrive in the environment. Township may consider developing lists of recommended and not recommended species of plants for specific situations, such as shade trees, evergreen trees used for buffering, plantings within stormwater basins, ornamental trees and shrubs, and other ground covers. Personally, I think that's perfect.
I agree. I mean, the only thing, I don't know that we need to have a list of recommended plants, but we should definitely have a list of non-recommended.
That's a good point.
I will say, the landscape architect, our newer landscape architect director sits next to me in the office, very much agrees with that. She does not like plant lists at all, because it's things that change pretty regularly.
Yeah.
But it is something that I know a lot of developers like to see that, because they'll come, and if you tell them, we want to see native species, we want to see things suitable to the environment, and unless they're hiring a good landscape architect themselves, and a lot of times the smaller projects, they're not doing that, they want to be told specifically, okay, what tree can I plant there? Or, what kind of bushes can I do? Just tell me what to do, I'll put it on the list, I'll go buy them, as opposed to not having a list where that they have to try and figure it out on their own, and then be told at the site plan hearing or somewhere else that, no, we don't like that species. So I understand why some people appreciate lists, but I will say our landscape architect director agrees with you there, and she strongly does not like lists of approved plants, because it's something that you gotta change frequently.
Yeah, but what about non-recommended?
Yeah, and certainly a list of invasive species or non-native species that are not recommended, that doesn't change as frequently.
So does the list need to be developed now, or the ordinance can be written and then a list can be
This would
developed?
certainly be the ordinance, once it's written, we could develop a list, if you or the township even wants to actually do a list, we
Because
certainly.
I wouldn't mind working on a list.
Yeah.
And there's lots of examples you can utilize.
I mean, I can think of 3 or 4 right now off the top of my head that I wouldn't want to see.
No tree of heaven,
No branch repairs, no
No branch
silver,
repairs.
silver maples,
what's the other one, certain ash trees.
Russian olive.
Destroying those.
Right.
I'm sure your partner there probably has a list, does she not?
She does, but she says she doesn't like lists, so she won't let me see it.
She doesn't have a non-recommended list either.
Not exactly, she'll review a landscaping plan, and they'll go through and say, swap this species, swap that species, pick something else. It is, I mean, it's not something that needs to change daily or weekly, but every couple of years, new disease comes in, things that, as well, I guess, I'm not a landscape architect, or a biologist or botanist by any sense, but I know, conditions in which certain species thrive or not, they change. And then there's always, there's scientists out there creating new, species of trees, new hybrids of different things that might be more hardy to certain environments that weren't hardy before.
Well, Jimmy, if we actually had lists, what would you talk about at planning board meetings?
Huh?
I said, if we had the list for people to follow, what would you talk about at planning board meetings? You wouldn't be able to discuss it.
We didn't mention size. Should that be mentioned in this paragraph, like all planting material greater than 4 feet or something like that?
That could be covered in an updated ordinance. I want to say you already have requirements for shade trees and evergreen trees, that evergreen trees have to be a certain size and shade trees have to be a certain caliber. I don't know if you have specifics for shrubs about a certain size or a certain gallon size at planting, but that could be covered under a new. What we're basically recommending here is almost a comprehensive update to your landscaping requirements.
And Ralph, we have a requirement in that solar project,
That was only one application
Right.
though.
but we have the ability to do
Oh, I know
that.
And that's where the question's heading. I don't wanna write a book on this. What about the maintenance side of that, of the planning, you know, if this is a buffer? What about the maintenance side of that, after the bond expires?
That's a good point.
When the trees are dead.
No, I've heard differing opinions on this. My understanding is anything, if it was an integral part of a site plan approval, such as a buffer, even
Right.
after the bond has expired, 'cause I think usually they're only bonding for what's in the public right of way and not necessarily on a side yard or a rear yard, but you can, if trees die and the buffer is, no longer serving its purpose, the town can go out and require them to replant those, remove the dead tree and replant a new tree. That's my understanding, although there might be different legal opinions on that since it's private property.
But it's almost like a zoning violation at that point.
To some degree, yes.
Yeah, if you have a commercial building that you're supposed to maintain a buffer, you don't maintain your buffer, you're in
Yeah,
violation. of the
certainly, if somebody plants a couple of trees in their backyard and they don't take care of them very well and it dies 3 years later, the town's not gonna go in and issue them a zoning violation for that. But if a commercial use adjacent to a residential use and that buffer was integral to their site plan approval, that's a required part of the zoning, that they had a buffer of 50 feet in width and now they have a buffer of 30 feet in width because several trees died, then the town should, I believe, have the authority to go in and enforce the zoning regulations. Things like that are always there's difficulty in actually enforcing something like that, because it requires somebody going out, whether that's the zoning official or you're sending out a tree expert to identify what's going on with the trees. Are they dead? Can this come back? That sort of thing. But I think the town does have the authority to do that if they chose to try to go that route.
Yeah, if it's part of the, you know, authority, you know, the buffer requirement or whatever the case was, I think that would be, that's.
Can Kate or Chris or a combination just confirm that and there is no need to put it in here, but is there a pathway on a commercial buffer separating residents, trees are dying? Is the pathway is through the zoning office? I'm perfectly fine with that, but I just want to make sure there's a pathway somehow to have it corrected.
Right, and it would most likely, that's what I would think, it would be through the zoning officer. to
I
go
think
out
so
there and
too,
cite
but
that.
I just wanna make sure that we have, or do we need to have anything at the approval side of it to reinforce or to help the zoning officer in the future when trees die? You know, if it's in the zoning ordinance, then, you know, he should have enough teeth to be able to go after him at that point. But,
Well, I think
can we do something to help him?
a properly drafted resolution would cover you on that.
Yeah. And that's why I want to check on, make sure that we're covered from that angle.
Could I just ask a question real quick? Sorry. This might be the elephant in the room. I mean, these are fantastic proposals. And I was reading along to architecture. Now we have, or we're supposed to have, an architectural and landscape design advisory board. And to my knowledge, that's never been filled. Is that kind of an elephant in the room? The fact that we have all these goals, but there's nothing actually concrete established to actually get them to fill this position, to actually come up with a lot of these plans. And I don't know if that's something that should be said in the master plan or not, just that these positions should be filled so that, you know, we'll have developers come in and say, well, we didn't submit an architectural review because you don't have a board to review it, even though that's required. So
Chris, we sort of get around that. You are correct in your statement, but in the past 5 years or so, we do have what's called on the planning board a conceptual review committee.
Yeah.
And within that,
Yeah,
we
where
do look at
considered
the architectural design.
Maybe
Correct, Joe?
Right, that's one pathway of doing it. And the other, the answer to the question is that
He said that.
historically, it was the chair of the planning, chair of zoning, EDC. I forget the other couple, but
Basically what I'm suggesting is they
that made up the
remove that
conceptual review board. I've sat on several of those. One of them is, would have been the old Colucci lumber. That building was supposed to be a four-sided metal building. And in fact, that's never gonna fit. And it ended up being You know, it ended up being stone all the way around because it went from a full metal building to just the front stone to stone all the way around. And that discussion took place at a table. I think that, and I have to go back and double check to make sure I'm right. I think the review of the architectural board is driven by the applicant's request to go in front of the architectural board rather than the township mandating that you need to go in front of it. So if an applicant is coming in and wants to go to the conceptual that Ralph is referring to, or the architectural, the request is generated by the applicant saying, I want you to look at my plans ahead of time, tell me what you see wrong before I go to the podium. And that's the way the systems work for years.
Can we make that requirement, the
Yeah.
conceptual review?
Yeah.
That's a legal question, I don't know if
I've
we make it a
always thought that
requirement.
they belonged there, I mean, there was
I
one
just know it was
development
always
where we
voluntary,
rammed
it
them.
was at the applicant's,
Yeah.
at the applicant's request, it wasn't at the township's requirement.
Because we did one where on, where was it? Actually, it never came to application up at Main and Tuckahoe, right there on the corner. It's still for sale. And we pretty much convinced him to do a Randall Aaron subdivision. At the conceptual review, we said, we don't want to see any of those houses. Why don't you do, and we drew it for him, drew the single loaded streets and all. And he was with his realtor and said, can you sell these houses? And he went, yeah, it's a different technique, but I can do it. But I don't think he ever applied, but he was going to do it. And I thought if we can require them to come before a conceptual review meeting, it doesn't force them into anything. But that's the point where you can open up the developer to start thinking differently. We did the same thing at Dutch Mill and Main Road. That whole farm is preserved because of a conceptual review meeting. And that wouldn't happen if there hadn't been one.
I think there's an application for commercial as well. If there had been a conceptual review of that dollar store that's given everyone who lives near it a headache on New Street and that whole Defiance neighborhood, if they'd have come in for a conceptual review, it could have been suggested then that they have the roads coming in off of 40 instead, off of 47 instead of the neighborhood where they're shining lights and making people miserable, and that they have the building placed in the center instead of so close to the people next to them. We could have much better designs and much more livable neighborhoods and residences if they did come in for a conceptual and it was discussed with them, this could be done better. This could protect our residents better. If you just make these changes before you go for this design.
I would love to see it if it's
Well,
required, if it's,
I mean,
that's possible.
If Ken could weigh in on this, I mean, I don't think there's any provision of municipal land use law that would force a developer to come to a conceptual review.
And that was my
I think it says you
understanding,
can
it was
recommend it,
voluntarily
but-
on
Yeah,
their
it's
part.
voluntary.
Well,
Voluntary, no.
there's.
I don't wanna drag this meeting out, but I'll respond to Barbara's here. I sat in that meeting, and that was the meeting I'm referring to, that it was a four-sided metal building. First off, my statement that afternoon was, why don't you build a Wendy's there instead of a dollar store? And the answer was, my client wants a dollar store, it's their property, that's what their application is. Then it was a metal building, and that's how the metal building changed from a brick, from a metal building to one-sided brick to four-sided brick. The reason for the exit on New Street was just because of the tractor trailers. The tractor trailers, if they pulled in off of Delsey Drive, would have had to back out on the Delsey Drive, and that's why the engineers, both ours and their engineers, came up with the U-turn around there. I remember stuff like the tractor trailers are only supposed to be in the back of the building right there at the edge of New Street, nose at the end of New Street, so they're not blocking the driveways, preventing vehicles from getting out of there. Don't know if that's happening, but all those type of things, that meeting did occur. Whether people like that store there or not, it was their property to develop.
It says in the plans though that no tractor trailers are supposed to exit on the new road. And there's even a sign that says tractor trailers are not
I'm
allowed.
sorry, you're right, it's the other way.
Yeah,
It's the other way.
they're supposed to go out, but they always go on the new road.
When they come in, they're supposed to stop, once the tail gets off a new road, they're supposed to stop and unload in the back, because the thought process was the cars that are parked there at the store, if the tractor trailers there during the day, you're gonna be blocking people from trying to get out of their parking stalls. So that's why it was, and you're right, it was, it's been a long time, and also been a long day, but the reason for the entrance or exit on New Street was the circular of the tractor trailers to be able to get out of there. Also DOT was involved in that at that point in time. So those meetings did take place, and there was a lot of conversations at that point in time. I guess my point is the project could have been a lot worse than it was
Live next to it,
if a lot of
probably.
time wasn't spent working on that.
Well,
And I
well,
realize
the
there's trash
building-
problems, there's light problems and all that type of stuff out there. That's an altogether different issue, but the effort, a little history, the effort was put in on that. Okay, I'm sorry.
Just two things on that, because there's two different potential types of meetings we're talking about here. There is a conceptual review, which any applicant is allowed to request a concept review before the
Correct.
planning board, not the zoning board, but before the planning board, as an informal, non-binding review, where you say, we're thinking about doing this, they present literally one sheet of a plan, and the board's allowed to make comments, the applicant's allowed to say, well, what'd you consider, what do you think about this? And you can say whatever you want. And then there's also, which we do in some other towns, and it does slow the development process a little bit, but it does have some benefits, is there are technical review committees where it's made up of a planning board member or two and the board professionals, and the applicant meets with them to discuss the application, go over what variances are there, make suggestions for improvements. And then they're basically told, and that's sort of the completeness process of, you need to submit this, you need to submit that, we want to see these changes. But either one of those processes does not change that if a developer is proposing to do something and they're meeting all the zoning standards, they can go to as many conceptual review and technical review committees as we want to make them. If they have a by right application, essentially the board can't stop them from building. So if Dollar General is meeting the setbacks and providing the buffers and providing their parking, you can't deny an application because you'd rather see it closer to the street.
I agree with you,
Right,
but
but-
what is the reason for not requiring a conceptual review? In other words, it's still non-binding, just the way it is now, but it's the only opportunity that the township has to talk to the developer and try to convince them to do something. You're right, they may decide to totally ignore everything that was, but it's the only chance that the township has.
All I would say is I don't know that there's anything in the municipal land use law that would allow you to require a concept review first. You can establish a technical review committee where they are required to meet with essentially a subcommittee of the planning board. In West Deptford, we have, it's the planning board chair, another planning board representative, and the zoning board chair. And it's basically determining completeness as well as providing some comments, but I don't know that you would.
There's no public input when you are meeting the requirements of a minor subdivision. Okay?
Well, Sarah's talking about something different. She's talking about a conceptual review that includes architecture, designs, and aesthetics.
Again, no public input.
Yeah, there's never been any public input. It would be too
Public
confusing.
input at the, right, that's not at that level.
You can need that if you're meeting all the requirements, you should really only, right?
It helps the developer to get a clear picture of what the community wants.
Right. I mean, when we told that one developer, we don't wanna see houses from the street, he had them all like your typical cookie cutter. And he went, what? No, we don't wanna see them.
But you can't restrict that.
No, that's what I'm saying,
It's a recommendation.
It's a recommendation, and in the case that we did it, the developer went, and it was, we didn't even have our new master plan in place yet. And we just came down on him with the M&Ms and all that stuff, and he liked it.
I think if it's strongly encouraged so that the process runs smoother, I think that would be the way to go, is to strongly encourage it. Process would run smoother if everybody, was able to attend this conceptual, design here, to this conceptual hearing, so that way that, it runs smoother, but there are, as Chris and, as other members have indicated, there's really no legal, way to make them have to attend these, but they can be strongly encouraged, just so, to make the process run smoother for everybody involved.
So under 22, can we add a statement that says that conceptual reviews are strongly encouraged? I mean,
Absolutely.
I'm thinking it wouldn't be under 22, it would be an entirely new number all to itself, but developers seeking concept review for all major developments at the planning board is strongly encouraged.
okay.
One other thing I do want to mention, I mean, it is in here, as much as I hate saying this because my background before getting into planning was that I did do 6 years in architecture school. So as much as I want to tell every developer exactly how I want to see every building to look, the law does limit a planning board or zoning board their ability to dictate design to a developer to the extent that it's subjective opinion on design versus some sort of more objective criteria, as well as generally speaking, outside of a historic district or a historic landmark or a redevelopment area, we're allowed to negotiate a little more through a redeveloper's agreement. The same thing, if they're meeting all the zoning standards, to some degree, you can suggest it, you can have design standards and design guidelines, but if Wendy's comes in and what they're proposing meets all of the zoning and other design standards, you can't tell them we're gonna deny your application because you're proposing gray ethos and we want beige brick.
Only if
You can suggest that, to the extent that somebody needs variances related to a front yard setback, you can say, well, we'd be more amenable to granting this front yard setback if the building was more attractive.
Yes,
But if they don't need variances, you can't really, the architectural review is your powers are somewhat limited.
without an historic district, you can do that
In a historic district, yes.
Yeah.
That's really the only place the law allows you to be strict about, no, you have to use this material, you have to use this color.
like you keep back, you
And
can't,
we,
they can't build something
when those
that doesn't
discussions
have
were
that
taking
structure.
place, we absolutely knew that, we were absolutely aware, and I get back to metal versus the brick and all that type of, we knew that they met the minimum requirements. It's just that in the village, Malaga Village, this would look better, this would look nicer, type of thing, and that communication back and forth, will get you a long way, but you're right, you can't mandate, you gotta have brown brick, I don't want gray brick on there, that's gonna end up with court, so.
But we could develop better architectural standards for non-residential development or multi-family development. Again, as much as they can be mandated, which isn't that much, but
We already have some standards in Malaga Village and Franklin there.
Yes, we do.
well then do we need this number 23?
I don't believe so, but.
That's the one about architectural design
Oh,
standards.
that could be for any place, not just.
That's all the other zones,
All
all
the
the
other
other two
zones,
villages.
Because sometimes they do it just because you ask too. A lot of them have other designs in their back pocket, you just, you know that Wawa down at Mays Landing, can you do something like that? And they, yeah, we can, they won't do what you want, but they will do better maybe, so. There's negotiations.
What about the word architectural concept, rather than a full design that they don't even know what they want, more of a concept drawing. Providing more of a concept.
Certainly at a concept review.
Well, no, under your 23, architectural design standards shall be developed.
What are you saying, architectural
What would you have to
Yeah, I'm not really following what you mean.
get a different set of design standards for every
Yeah.
zoning district?
Yeah.
Not necessarily, no. The suggestion here is some standards for breaking it down into a couple different types of development.
Oh, okay.
Multifamily
All right.
design standards of, basically a few basic standards of, primary exterior facade material are encouraged to be such and such, but not, it doesn't specifically say that you absolutely have to do brick, stone, or,
Okay, I had
certain
it reversed,
development.
I had them bringing it in, we're
Yeah.
developing standards for them to, all right, I had it backwards.
It would be more along the lines of encouraging certain types of materials in primary facades. Maybe, and I have seen this done, you can require, for commercial buildings, a percentage of the frontage be glazing, so that you don't just have a blank wall, that 40% of the ground floor of a commercial building has to be glazing, so you have an actual storefront there rather than just a door and a brick wall or a concrete block wall.
That reminds me, that's also something you can do on warehouse frontages.
I think
Right.
Yes, and that is one of the suggestions given.
Because it doesn't talk about having a different,
I see something.
putting in an entrance or putting in,
Well,
does,
what we did say is that the visible portions of the warehouse, the office should be located in the more publicly visible portions, and it should be designed to be
Yeah,
more
there's-
reflective of
oh,
Right.
a contemporary office
Yeah,
building rather than a
yeah.
big box warehouse.
Right.
yeah, I
And
know.
that's something that would be, assuming the township wants to adopt those standards, the specifics of what that says would go into the actual ordinance and not necessarily the master plan.
So, architectural design standards, there are some now
Yeah.
for Malaga and Franklinville, but they're not historic districts.
No,
Malaga,
they're in the,
Under the village.
Oh,
The
just
village.
because they're at the village zone,
Right.
okay.
And they're more, again, it's the same thing. There are standards there and they're design standards, they're not zoning, so somebody violating one of those it's not triggering a variance. And it would be hard for the planning board to deny an application if they meet every other zoning requirement and every other design standard, if they're violating one or two of the Malaga Village design standards. It's the type of thing that you can encourage better design to the extent somebody needs variances, that it gives you sort of leverage to say, if you meet these sections of the code, we're more inclined to grant a variance for that. The board can't necessarily specifically say that, like you're trading sections of the code in order to grant a variance, but it's kind of understood. The projects that need variances, that becomes a little bit of a negotiation of what can you give us if we're gonna give you this.
Is there any way to write an ordinance that says, when a commercial development is coming to an area where it is abutting next to or even across the street from a pre-existing residential development or residential zone, can we have an ordinance that says something like, the design of this commercial, or industrial, whatever, development, should be designed so that it has the least impact on the residences around it? You know, it should be cited on the plan where it's furthest away, or, you know, the things that would be problems for them.
I would say it's hard to say something like that, because we have setback requirements, and you can put in things in the code that say when you're adjacent to a residence, the side yard setback maybe gets doubled. I don't know, but something like just saying the least impact on the adjacent residence is a bit of a subjective term, and you have to determine exactly what those impacts are.
And doesn't the phrase pertaining to the architectural design standards for non-residential development be used as a tool to ensure that new development fits into the desired character of the community? Doesn't that kind of cover that?
As long as it gets enforced, yes.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and that's up to the planning board usually at that point. Okay, so is there anything else on 23 that we need to discuss?
Yeah, I wanted to ask Chris about the Deptford example with the architectural review board.
Oh, it's not an architectural, it's a technical review committee where
It's a subcommittee of the planning board, correct?
it is, I believe, 2 planning board members, 1 zoning board member, myself as the board planner, the board engineer, and the board attorney. Is we meet and the applicants come and they basically present
Right,
almost in the same way that they would present a full site plan to the planning board.
right.
And we review the plans and we issue letters, and then we determine, as a subcommittee, we determine completeness and talk about, this is what we want to see in terms of, all right, you need these 3 variances, can you move the building this way, can you,
This is
This is
even
gonna be a
before it
problem,
gets
this is
to
not
the
gonna be a
planning.
problem.
This is
this is before
it
the
gets-
official planning board application.
Okay, why don't we go with that?
So they can make so no public comment, so you don't have an opportunity to comment, you want the professionals to make all the recommendations
Well,
to
no,
the developer.
Chris
and then the developer
himself
can make-
said that public, it's open to the public, right?
I
Chris?
believe it is open to the
There
public,
you
but
go.
So you
I'm
can
not sure
watch
I've
it,
seen
but you can't comment on it.
Well,
Okay?
But once it becomes to the planning board, then we have our chance to have it written.
yeah, they still go to the planning board.
Yeah,
But
but
you
you don't,
have
not
some-
before, so you're gonna have them make the comments, make the deals with the developer. You don't want them to not honor the deal they made with the developer, do you?
You mean like the EDC does now with us?
Well, didn't you say it's all non-binding,
Well,
so
it
is
comes
with the
No, no.
that's a
taxes
different, that's a different
A
point.
conceptual review before the full planning board is non-binding on both parties.
Right.
The technical review committee is binding, because we're making a completeness determination, and we're issuing reports that are saying, these are the variances that are required, here's our recommendations, and that technically becomes part of the public record.
So what it sounds like Deptford is doing, and that's where this is a.
Yeah, West
Deptford,
Deptford,
Deptford.
Deptford
So-
does a similar thing where one of the engineers in our office does that, but I'm not involved in that.
So West Deptford does their completeness review in the form of a, like, I guess, a subcommittee type of review. Here, the completeness review is already performed and kind of a part of the actual regular meeting, from what I can gather. Or, well, it's kind of done by our officials, and then it's discussed at our meeting about the planning, at the actual planning board meeting, whether or not they've met completeness. So it's just 2 different ways of handling things. I mean, it's up to the subcommittee if they wanna recommend changing the process, but, that's what it sounds like to me, that the West
Does
Deptford
your
hasn't.
board also look into architectural,
We
type
get,
of things? And design standards and things of that nature?
yes, we do a mostly full review of the application as
Well,
part of this
that,
meeting.
that would make,
But
that
we're
would-
not necessarily reviewing in terms of critiquing the architectural style, unless it's something that in the code specifically says,
well,
you're in a historic district, you have to go to the HPC and get approval first.
But that's after they've already paid the engineer to do the design.
To some degree, yes. I mean,
it's
to come to the, we call it the work committee in West Deptford. You can submit almost anything and get on the agenda to come to the work committee, and then we'll tell you how many sets of drawings and what plans we need for the full site plan. So they can go to the work committee with just a single sheet and say, and we actually had this yesterday, there was a developer wants to amend a site plan, and they had just one sheet as a concept plan, and they met with the work committee, and we worked through some issues, and they're not going to the planning board yet. We told them, when you get your full site plan engineered, you're coming back to the work committee and meeting with us again, and then you'll go to the planning board a month after that. So like I said, there are benefits to doing this, but there is a drawback also, that sometimes minor developments that going through this process, it takes an extra couple of months to go through it, as well as it requires a lot more submissions.
How many
And
extra
extra
billable hours?
meetings and billable hours.
The billable hours generally tend to be about the same, because it's a little more upfront in these meetings, and then the actual resolution compliance tends to be quite a bit less, because once they've gotten their approval from the planning board, they've already satisfied most of our comments. And then the going through the resolution compliance and having them submit more plans to comply with conditions from the board usually is a bit quicker. But there is definitely more.
There's gotta be more.
There's a little more upfront, yes, because we're reviewing it twice
Right.
essentially.
Exactly.
Well, it all depends on how many revisions we're asking them to make. If somebody comes forward with a bad plan and then they only make half the revisions that the board has asked, then we're reviewing it again. But plenty of times it happens. I did it today. I got 2 review letters out for projects that were submitted a month ago, and they got entire new sets of plans, and it took me about 2 hours to review a full set of site plans, because it's largely the same as what I'd already reviewed before, whereas maybe it takes 10 hours to review a set of site plans, and 7 took 2. 6 or 7 the first time, and 2 the second time. It requires a lot more paper, though. I get stacks and stacks of paper, these damn things coming in all the time.
well, it's an added level of scrutiny for better design standards in this town. I like that, it's pretty close to what Sarah wants, and, you know, Deptford is the example here that we could piggyback on. And, you know, we just, I don't know, I just noticed that our standards are not that good in this town.
It's a complete disagreement, but we're also reviewing it. I don't wanna make it sound like
Yeah,
we're
that's a
improving
cheap
every
shot.
project.
Right.
At who?
I'm sorry, I
At
put a
who?
lot of time and effort into this, and that's a cheap shot.
At who?
At me, well, anybody who's been doing it in the past, from the conceptual or architectural side of it. It's in there, we can't, it's already been determined that we legally can't require it, but we can strongly encourage both the conceptual and the architectural. Let's move on.
Well, why are you making this decision, Joe?
Yeah, I mean, there's
Well,
no
because
review that
I
happens
was
this technical.
appointed to that spot to
Okay.
do a job. I
This
highly
is why we shouldn't
recommend
allow these people
Okay.
at the
to
end of the
interject
year,
without
I
needing.
you send a letter,
I
and
agree.
anybody else in there wants to criticize the EDC or anywhere else, send a letter in the township committee and ask to be placed on the
Let's
board.
stop talking in a personal kind of way.
Yeah.
We don't
I'm not
need to do-
talking in a
I know,
personal-
Joe, I understand exactly what you're saying, and it's fine. But we need to just make a decision about whether we want to even pursue this, because the technical review committee approach is much more complicated. And it's a big change, and so I'm not sure that we're prepared to do that in here. Do we want to?
The only other thing I'll say, and I think this is what Jason was just saying, is that there isn't necessarily any review that's happening at the technical review committee that isn't also happening before something goes to the planning board.
From out of your office,
This-
right?
Because, yeah, the engineer is looking at things, and, well, the planner, if we had one.
Yeah, I think we should move on to the next topic.
Yeah, I don't think we
Desire to
want
put a technical review board together.
Yeah, I think that's a fairly substantial change, and I'm not sure that it's going to bring us anything much more than we have now. Okay, it's how we all feel about it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
24 is about stormwater management regulations. We should consider revising them to require stricter controls on stormwater runoff in environmentally sensitive areas and those areas with poor soil conditions. It seems to me that there are pretty strong runoff and stormwater management requirements that exist already, but I have yet to see a stormwater management plan come in for review, at least at the environmental commission level, which I never have understood. Now, the engineer is looking at things and sometimes commenting on them, but I would love to see the actual plan where they figured out where they could put in a, they could break up the, you know, the stormwater, that they don't have to put in a basin. Instead, they could use the 9 different techniques that are recommended. I've yet to see that happen. I've yet to see them on paper anywhere, or, you know, on any plan. And I sort of don't understand why it's not there, like why it's not a requirement to show how you're gonna handle stormwater.
Make a request to your engineering company.
It certainly is that every major development, I think it's over a quarter acre triggering stormwater.
Yeah, that's my fault.
Yeah,
What-
exactly.
I'm trying to think of at least since the stormwater regs were updated, 2021, DEP put out new regs that you had to follow, and then I think they did it again last year, and then Pinelands followed suit at some point last year.
Yeah.
And I think Pinelands might even be making some more updates right now, I'm not entirely sure. Every major development has to have a stormwater management plan and treat their stormwater. To what extent any of that's being sent to the environmental committee for you to review, I don't know, but I do know. I'm trying to think of how many applications we've had in this town in the last year that would have triggered new stormwater. The only real big site plan we had that I can think of is the solar application, and they didn't really have much stormwater because state law says that the actual panels are precluded from being considered impervious surface. So they just have
Are you
one
referring to
basin.
those alternative techniques you're talking about for the management? Is that what you're referring to?
In the design,
Right, and you're saying why aren't people using those?
yes.
I mean, are they required to use this? Or-
My understanding of the
It's
stormwater
encouraged.
regs is it gives you sort of a set of options, and you have to choose from the options how you want to deal with it, but it's, if you're meeting the water quality, and I think there's like 3 different things that you have to meet, and if you're meeting those 3 things, it's kind of up to the developer how they want to meet them, but they just have to demonstrate that they're meeting the regs. I don't know that the town can say, you have to choose this option, you can't choose that option.
No, but I thought they had to explain why they weren't using such and such options.
They do.
Or, you know, in other words,
So to some degree, that's probably in the stormwater management report. I'm not aware of any meeting where we've gotten down to the level of asking questions, why did you choose this method rather than that method?
I think that's like one of those things that we'd like to encourage, you know,
Yeah.
alternative designs, however, we can't mandate it, like, you know.
well, maybe we can't mandate it if they have adequate explanations for why they're not using any of the control methods that exist.
Green.
You know, whether it's rain gardens or whatever, but we don't seem to ever have them using those, so we're not strongly encouraging it now, so I'm wondering whether we could. Well, we should make this, make
Maybe
this
you
short,
say
stronger.
encourage these alternatives, and if not able to be used or not applicable, need to provide support justification for why not.
Yeah, because I think that's what's legally required, but well,
It is.
Right, well, stormwater best practices, right, so they'd have to comply with whatever is required, and right, you can provide them with they'd have to provide potentially a reason that they couldn't.
Right.
I'm trying to look and see what's there, if there's anything at all. If I
Well, I mean, the
don't have-
code, as far as I'm aware,
No.
largely implemented the DEP requirements, which is DEP mandated essentially every town had to adopt new stormwater regs last year. And as far as I'm aware, your code now is consistent with what the state requires. It's largely verbatim the DEP requirements just inserted into Franklin's code.
but you can make them stronger.
You are allowed to make them stronger. I only know of one town that has done so already. I don't know that they've actually had the developments go through that process with the new standards. Deptford Township, I don't know if they are developing standards. I don't know if they've even adopted them yet, actually, now that I speak. I'm not involved in that, the engineers in my office are. But as we discussed last week, it is possible that the state requirements are the minimums. You are allowed to
Yeah.
exceed them if you wish.
Yes, as a
So,
township.
so should the language then be that it's strongly encouraged to use the alternatives? And if they can't be used to support justification as to why not, but at a minimum, the DEP regulations.
And perhaps in the context of what you have in here, which is in environmentally sensitive areas and areas with poor soil conditions would be especially, we could use the word especially in, strongly encourage in general, and then especially in environmentally sensitive areas.
Yeah, it's,
Yeah, I can certainly amend that to say that, using the alternative methods to traditional stormwater management was strongly encouraged, and if those, can't be utilized, justifications would be
Yeah.
provided as to why they can't.
Yeah.
Right.
And especially in those areas with, environmental poor soil conditions.
I interject on something there, and just this is, some of us have had this discussion before up there on the board with things with flooding. It's no secret where I live. When that retention basin was built right there across from the dollar store on 47, that was to stop the flooding on 47 originally, on that little curve. Matthews Plaza got built, and then the retention basin doubled in height, the water never drains. The dollar store was changed from Colucci, which had a total, complete permeable surface to an impervious surface. All drains into that same retention basin, so then it floods, and our street floods every time it rains. The Newfield Bank just added 20% to their parking lot, which doesn't seem like much, but now the stream that runs right next to it floods. I mean, it gets 15 foot wide, flowing like a river, and floods our whole woods behind us into our backyard now. All because it's all supposed to drain in the same retention basin that never worked to start with. So where does that protect the residents? And I understand there's regulations, but somebody through multiple applications fell drastically shy of what they should have done. So this is, and especially in a high water recharge rate, our groundwater right now is at 6 to 8 feet, depending on where you dig. I mean, you can ask any septic company in our area, they're hitting it at just under 6 feet in some areas. You know, there's no place to put anything anymore because the groundwater's come right through everybody's basement. You change a small amount of a parking lot, it's extremely detrimental to anybody that lives in that area. It's not a little area problem. It becomes a nightmare.
And isn't the storage facility?
Well, thank goodness that got declined because of this flooding. Because they knew it would just add to an existing issue. I provided 7 different videos on it, of what happens when it rains. And it looks like a river behind us. I mean, it's just shocking since they changed that little bit of bank parking lot. That stream always had it's got 2 inches of water in it all the time. When it rains, that bank parking lot makes that 15 foot, 4 foot deep river.
Another thing to strongly encourage, pervious paving.
Yeah.
Overflow areas especially.
There's nothing to absorb it anymore. You know, it's just a problem. And they know in our area, and I'm sure it happens in other areas, but I
How does
experienced it
that work?
firsthand.
Like, in other words, I'm not a stormwater expert, and this stuff's so confusing, but I see it kind of like what you're describing as the creeping major subdivision. So in other words, you have a big development, stormwater, all that, and then Newfield expands their parking lot. How does that get, who is looking into that? Who is looking into that little one that affects the big one that affects, and then another little one over here?
It's only if it's caught by somebody.
Yeah, so how can we
Honestly, I don't know if
strengthen?
there's any provisions for existing disturbed areas, if you're not creating new disturbance, are largely exempt from the stormwater regs. I don't know if there's any provision of, I think it's a quarter acre of new disturbance is what triggers major development under stormwater regulation standards. That you come in for a minor site plan amendment to do a fifth of an acre, and then a year later you come in for another fifth, and then a year later another fifth.
It's supposed to be counted back to 2004. Since 2004, you know, and it's a quarter acre of impervious or an acre of disturbance. So cumulatively, you know, if you're in the same development. So, I mean, to the question that was posed, I mean,
There is that.
to my knowledge, any plan that comes before the township meets the regulations, and it must meet the regulations before approval. So, I mean, what more can we do than required
Well, yeah.
to meet the regulations?
But in that bank case, they said that the percentage was so small it wouldn't affect anything.
Well, again,
Well, that was drastically inaccurate.
well, the regulations state that if it's not more than a quarter acre,
Right,
it's
which-
new impervious.
Right,
it was
which I
not.
understand that, but obviously they fail the residents. So there's where something needs to be changed.
Well, I mean, that's a state regulation, so, I mean.
But we can do more,
Take up-
somebody just said
that's
earlier.
right. So-
It was waived of wetlands, and it was waived of being a flood hazard area, and it's both. They were asked to remove some of the parking that they said they weren't using, that abuts the house behind it, and they refused to do that, but at the same hearing, Byers Electric did that. They made up for their extra pavement by removing some pavement. The bank could have done the same thing. The board didn't ask them, I asked for this. You know, I suppose as the engineer caught the wetlands flood hazard area, but then it got waived because the engineer stood up there and said, well, you know, because there's already some pavement here, it's not a problem. Well, Joe Arsenault, the wetlands expert, was like, his head was exploding. when he found out how that went down. So,
But
Well,
who
that's-
is in charge of catching that stuff?
Well, Sarah, let me jump in
CMA.
for
I
a
guess
second,
that's
because
my
some
question.
people ain't gonna believe this, but I'm gonna talk to Cindy. Cindy, back in the 08-09 era, when that retention pond they're talking about across the street kept overflowing, was it not determined, because, again, that was those particular years, and Mike was here, didn't we go to state DOT because they own that and needs to maintain it?
Absolutely,
So I think
but they never maintained it as they should,
until they got pressure put on them,
until you had to keep calling.
and that was in 08-09.
No, you did,
And
you're right.
so I believe a lot of, to the engineer and really more to the zoning officer and to the township committee, if they look into the ownership of the retention pond and the requirement of the state to come in and maintain that, may have a ripple effect of alleviating a lot of problems. And this is 08-09 that we dealt with that. Georgia was the administrator, and we were standing out there having a very intense conversation with the state engineers about closing down your highway. If you don't fix the problem, we're closing the highway down because you're flooding it.
How would that apply in this particular case, Mr.?
Well, to me, it has a ripple effect. If the water coming off site and that retention pond, retention basin is not being maintained and it's not draining down, to me, that has a ripple effect of the water coming off and accumulating out there. Now there's twice the amount of water that there was in the past. I have to wonder if that retention pond has been taken care of since the 08-09 version or years. And
Is there a
really-
retention pond?
There is.
Yes.
That was what I mentioned. That was built there before any of these businesses came in. The only one that was there when that was built was
it
Coolidge
was
Home.
built there because 47 was flooding, and they
Right.
put that in there. And-
And its size has never been improved, but everything keeps getting added and dumped into that same.
Right.
Now, it's not draining
Now
right
you
to-
turn around, you don't maintain it, and it's not draining down, you know. Will there be more water? Sure, because there's been more development. But the root cause, or the root solution maybe here is for the township to get a hold of DOT and have a come to Jesus meeting out there about maintaining their retention pond, regardless of where the water's coming from.
That still
But
doesn't
the
justify
retention
all the
pond-
added water that has happened with it not working correctly. These complaints have been lodged long before those businesses were even built.
But that still doesn't answer my question, is who catches this stuff? The
Who's
environmental
responsible for
commission?
making sure it doesn't happen?
No, the
boards.
environmental
Boards.
commission or
The
who?
boards
Like,
approve the plans.
right, but who
Yeah.
says,
Yeah, but
you're
you
doing
can't
this
do
on the property that you're applying, but we know that there's a property over there that is gonna be affected, like, who catches the
The
other
your
your
properties?
stormwater
See what I'm
calculations
saying?
have to prove that your post-development runoff is the same or less than the pre-development runoff. That's the
Yeah.
calculation.
Yeah.
And that's what Ed reviews for every planning board
Right.
application. That's a major application. They have to do stormwater, and if the zoning board engineer does the same thing when they have.
Or if your retention pond isn't working or needs to be
So that's only them
maintained,
to
it
do.
has a
They
ripple
feel
effect all the way back.
Post-
No,
post-
it's not,
construction
if somebody
is
fills
always
something,
an issue
you
of
feel
single
bank, you feel
maintaining
bank's problem, it's not their problem.
Okay.
And these are based on I think 2, 5, and 10-year storms. You know, if we have a 100-year storm, it's gonna flood.
Oh,
You know what I mean?
yeah.
So-
It's site specific, so what
Okay.
Jason said,
Right,
if they,
right.
They're
They're understaffed, and you have to sit there and scream and holler, jump up and down, and get their attention.
So theoretically, the bank shouldn't be adding anything.
Right. So it goes back to this.
But it clearly is.
It did. I mean, it's a given. We didn't never have our woods flood till that bank park lot's been done. And it's not a 100-year storm situation. It's a 3/4 inch or more rain.
Right.
Does it?
No,
So
but
then
Dave,
that is not what the
if the plan, if the calculations are correct, right?
They
each
couldn't have
site-
been.
Well, they may or may not be, but each site should stand on its own,
It should.
right? So that then goes back to that big retention pond isn't working right.
Well, and I understand, I'm again, what Mr. Pest said, you're saying, I'm not doubting that it isn't.
Yeah.
But it's still the fact that we're putting too much water back in this area that can't handle it. And each time these parking lots or businesses are built, somewhere this formula is failing the residents and the people in this area.
Well, the
It's failing.
DEP made the formula, they made the regulations, I mean.
Well, that doesn't make it right.
Well,
The
we're not
results are
DEP,
there.
I I'm not a congressman, you know, I can't change the regulations of the DEP.
No, but you could, but the boards in this town can protect the residents.
Yeah, at site plan, you need drainage, detention or
Yeah, but
retention
but
on
Kevin,
site.
They're
if
compliant with the state
if the
standards.
calculations show that they are compliant
Compliant,
with
we
state
can't say,
regulation,
oh, no, we
you
changed our
can't-
mind, but-
You can't make them do something more than what they're already doing.
But
You just can't, it's
if I
against the
can
law.
I just want to comment because Joe had asked me about this. And maybe, right now we have a big plan that's coming in at maybe 40. And just as Joe was saying before, when these guys come in, the state comes in, right now they're doing that whole project down there. But now we have another one coming in on top of it, Dollar General to be exact. Now, Jim, you're saying that it has to stay on that property. So let's say that 10-acre piece of property that they're gonna buy, you're saying a stormwater is gonna come in there. But we all know that there's a big flooding problem that goes on over there. Because once the house came down and the pond was built, and that guy's whole field on the other side all flooded, okay? So the state should be out there, as Joe says, and correcting it. The problem is they're giving you guys the direction, right, that you have to follow, that it all has to fall under their guidelines, correct? So can we really do anything, or is it always that we gotta go after
After it's done.
it's done?
Well, I mean, I can't speak to the specifics of the stormwater on that one, because that's Ed who does those reviews and not me, but
Right.
yeah, we have reviewed that to see if they're compliant with the township's stormwater management regulations, which are consistent with the state regulations, and,
But then
I'd have
the
to look
guy
at our
comes in
review
after-
letter
so
to that
the
to see
guy
what
comes in
comments we had
afterwards.
there.
You're reviewing his, but you just reviewed the 40 and Main, huge plans we had there that came through for that. But now you've got a 10-acre site that's coming in, he's gonna have that, they're gonna have to put new access roads in and out, all those type of things, and they should be on just their property. But I can tell you, it floods terribly on that one side. I mean, it comes in right into that guy, everybody can see it. So we're gonna be down to the same thing where the
Just a
the
different area, the same
homeowners
problem.
in those areas are gonna be affected again. And that's not Malaga, that's probably more Forest Grove, right, Josh?
Yes.
Yeah.
Not under CMA, but under previous engineers, I've seen plans come in with no soil work done and approved for the basins, okay? And being told when I brought it up, oh, we'll deal with that later. Like after the approval, the engineers are supposed to get together. That's not the way it's supposed to be, you know? So a lot of things have been done that shouldn't have been done in the past, and we're reaping the problems. And Malaga has 4 streams that come in and all merge down into that stream that is where that neighborhood is. It's the Maurice River, you know, that it goes to. These people are suffering because of 4 streams catching all the runoff of all this development, and some of it was done without even the soil work necessary before it was approved. So
That's, okay, but as far as the master plan is concerned though, everything we're talking about is sort of a lack of proper oversight in the design stage, and also possibly insufficient enforcement. I'm not sure about that one, but as much. But I don't know what we can say in here that would help strengthen that.
Well, the reason I brought it up is because I'm the recipient of this, everything you just stated, the poor enforcement and poor planning side, or at least not enough oversight. I'm looking for a way to protect future residents, because obviously mine's done. My basement's gonna collapse the way it's going. I mean, it's that bad.
Yeah.
I didn't have a drop of water for the last 17 years. Every single time it rains now, I get perking coming up 3 inches high shooting out of my basement.
Up in
floor.
the open space
It's sickening.
requirements per development standard. Maybe our open space, we need more, we need more impervious cover. We need more.
Less impervious.
We need more open space on each developable lot.
Yeah, the real reason I brought up here was I was just looking for a way, being it isn't happening after it's done. I was looking for a pre-way to try to help residents.
Yes,
You know?
and I'm wondering what we can do in zoning.
Right, yeah, what you can word it, and I threw it out there just so you had this to think about. I'm just looking for protection for somebody, because it's after, I can't get it now, but maybe I can help somebody else in the township get it.
I mean, all I can say here is, like I had already put in here, and like we discussed last week to some degree, I don't know that we need to get into the individual specifics of particular cases and what happened 5 years ago, 3 years ago, or the next application. But you have to meet the minimum state requirements, which you're already doing. You are allowed to exceed those requirements and make your stormwater regulations stricter than the state. And right now, what this says is the township should consider having stricter requirements, and what you had just said,
under certain circumstances for, poor soil conditions and environmentally sensitive areas, that you consider having stricter requirements. You are allowed to do that. And then it would be the same case of, if they meet the requirements, they meet the requirements, but your requirements would be a little bit stricter than the state's.
To protect these areas.
Yeah.
And that's,
And I think we're largely covering that in what we're suggesting here.
What's the definition of poor soil?
This not being the ordinance, that would be up to whoever is drafting that ordinance in the future, if the township wants to go that route of defining soil types, and that would get into, the regulations right now have, what is it, class, is it 1 through 5 or A through E soils, and if you're in a certain class of soil based on how it drains, then you have to do certain things, it would be something like that, this would be my guess. It probably would not be me drafting that ordinance.
no, so the studies are out there. I don't know how accurate they are or when they were updated in our area, but I mean, I pulled them up. Where it shows the soil in our area and water runoff and high discharge rates and things like that. But I don't know how old they are or outdated, I don't know.
There's the soils maps, and there's also, as far as I'm aware, when somebody's doing their stormwater management report, they're supposed to also have some soil samples taken.
Okay, to
They're supposed
verify.
They're supposed to see where the seasonal high water table is and what their soils conditions are, so they're not just saying, well, this 1987 USGS soils
Right.
map says we're sandy loam, so.
Right, well,
we're
that's
gonna go
my
with
concern is how outdated is it? Right.
that. So they are supposed to be doing samples of the actual property.
And not, you know.
Okay, I think we've addressed this as much as we can. I think that having stricter controls and then working on that at the ordinance level is probably the only way we can really deal with this. Plus, recommending, strongly encouraging alternative approaches as well, alternative methods of handling stormwater. It's supposed to stay on the site. There's no question about that. And if it's not doing it, then there's some problem that has to be
Not
addressed.
supposed to migrate.
Let's go on to the 25. Yes. 25, township should consider revising the list of permitted uses within the highway commercial zoning district. Many stretches of the district, this has to do with the fact that there's so much residential use along there, and current zoning makes them non-conforming. I think we talked about this at some length.
We did, this is a new recommendation I put in, and you'll see the next one, 26, is now deleted, where the previous recommendation was to consider revising the boundaries of the district. This is a little simpler, it just says, make the existing residences permitted uses rather than non-conforming uses. So that if they want to expand on their kitchen in the backyard, they don't have to go to the zoning board for a D variance.
Which
They
I
just
think
get a building permit, assuming they meet the other zoning setbacks.
we were definitely all.
I don't-
So you're still allowing commercial development on your major highways, but you're not making the existing residences non-conforming, non-permitted uses.
Right.
I think it's the best of both worlds.
Yeah.
Any resident that's existing, they're no longer non-conforming, and we keep the corridor available for commercial development. It's the best of both worlds.
So this one, I think we have no problem with. 27, township has opted in for classes 1 to 4 cannabis businesses, but has not addressed these particular uses in the zoning code or other development regulations. As of now, they're simply considered permitted uses in any industrial district. Township should consider developing standards specific to these newly permitted cannabis businesses, including identifying the specific zoning districts where they are permitted. It's recommended that they be classified as conditionally permitted uses only in non-residential districts, and that they be located at least 1,000 feet from schools. I don't know what there's anything to add to that.
That seems pretty complete.
I'll put it this way, I've written cannabis regulations for about 10 to 15 different towns now. Most of the towns that, when these were first going in, that adopted really strict regulations and had a 2-page list of conditional standards for every cannabis business. They've revised them 3 or 4 times now to keep deleting things from that list. Like they originally had 1,000 feet from 8 different things and a whole bunch of different conditions that were very difficult to enforce. And every time an application actually came before them and said, okay, I want to open a cannabis cultivation facility in this existing 10,000 square foot building, but I'm violating these 7 of your conditions, the town would say, well, actually, this isn't so bad. And then they mostly got approved. I've seen very few times where somebody came in and said, I want to do a cannabis facility here and I'm violating your standards, where the town said, well, sorry, we're not amending our code again. So my personal recommendation here is you should have something there, because the town did opt in to say the classes 1 through 4, so not retail and not a delivery business, but the industrial uses, the cultivation, storage, cultivation, storage, transportation, and
Manufacturing.
manufacturing, yeah.
Those are allowed, and they're just industrial, light industrial uses is what they are, they should be treated as such, but your code doesn't specifically say that. So under state law, if you had opted in for retail, they'd be permitted in a commercial district. You did not do that, but you opted in for 1 through 4, and they're considered industrial uses. So it's kind of the similar situation to that solar facility, whereas even though it doesn't say in your code that a class 1 cannabis cultivation facility is permitted in this district, it's by law essentially considered an industrial district, and the business district permits light industrial uses to be permitted there. So I think just to avoid any of those situations possibly in the future, you should specifically say cannabis class 1 through 4 is permitted in these districts. And have just a few conditions, perhaps maybe only one condition of being a certain amount of distance from schools, as measured from building to building.
But what about if we had one side of the street is considered an industrial zone, and then the other side of the street is residential? So you're living across the street from one of these things.
Knock that
You
down.
can also put in provision that they have to be a certain distance from homes.
Yeah.
Although as we just discussed, it is hard to be anywhere in Franklin and not be at least close to somebody's house, because almost all your agricultural properties, which are a lot, they have a house on them. Even a lot of the industrial properties also have some residences on them.
And the regulations that are on them, or that would be on them, or theoretically are going to eliminate the nuisance aspect, so that they should not be affecting the residential neighbors.
But it does.
Like-
I mean, unfortunately, look, I live miles away from Lake Road, and when the wind's blowing the right way, I can smell it.
Well, isn't that a problem with it emitting things that it shouldn't be, odors?
No, exactly, it is, and unfortunately, see, look, New Jersey voted to legalize cannabis back in 2020. From that point on, it no longer became a personal use issue. You can smoke cannabis, you can do whatever you want. But unfortunately, when we have these businesses in our community, and this is just my personal opinion, but I've talked to a lot of residents about this over the past couple of weeks. And when you put these businesses in the community, it becomes a community impact issue. And, I've talked to so many, little retired women who are just like distraught. They're so sad because they live more than 200 feet away from one of these facilities. They never got a letter about it to come to the meeting to talk about it. And now they have to live next to it, and they have to deal with the smells and the odors. And again, you're not going to get high from the smell. I understand that, but it is a nuisance, and it's a real nuisance, and the residents are concerned enough about it that I think it's certainly important. I mean, obviously it takes a political change and not necessarily an ordinance or a master plan change to affect those things. But I think that's something to take in mind. And frankly, 1,000 feet I think is way too small for a lot of these facilities, or at least strengthening the ordinances where there are monitoring of the odors that come from these facilities, because again, that's the main concern from the residents.
Maybe that isn't the
That's the
approach, because they're not supposed to be emitting.
I
Yeah,
think
they're
there's
not,
also
but
a
they do.
lighting problem.
Yes.
And so if you're across the street from one of these big potential locations, it's like living across the street from a prison. I
Yeah.
mean, it's a problem.
And if
It's
it's
a
not, and if
problem.
they use the environmentally safe lights, the purple lights, you feel like you're being invaded. It still is, it may change the glow, but it's still an annoyance.
So I don't know, maybe, is there a way to write it that, they can be in non-residential areas and not adjacent or, somehow connected to a residential area?
I'm trying to think of how to word that, as well as if there are some places in town that are not, most of your non-residential districts are on the highway frontages. And there are, as we've discussed, on those highway frontages, there are a lot of existing residences interspersed among those non-residential districts. And all I can say, you can require that all activities, cultivation be indoors in a completely enclosed facility. Certain towns I've worked in have said they're not allowed to grow in greenhouses and are allowed to grow outside. It has to be in an enclosed facility. Oddly enough, I don't know how this works, but one was, I think it was maybe it was in Galloway or in Pleasantville, somebody wanted to grow in a greenhouse, but then the greenhouses would be completely covered with some sort of black fabric so that no light gets in, which to me that defeats the purpose of having a greenhouse if you want to get the sun in there. But I don't know, they said it's so they can control exactly how much light is coming in at exact times. But anyway, you can require that everything be indoors so you don't see any of the growing lights, because that's one of the concerns. You can.
I'm not so sure it's the growing lights, I think it's the perimeter lights.
Yeah, but sometimes that's for the security side.
Security fencing.
Maybe they need bigger
All the
buffers.
state law only requires that they be in a secure facility. There's no requirements that they have
prison lighting, that would be,
Yeah,
they'd still be
right.
subject to your lighting code and site plan
We
review.
don't have a lighting code.
You have some standards, it's not completely, there are some standards.
What about a vegetative buffer? If you have a good vegetative buffer, that can eliminate a lot of light problems. It works in my yard because my neighbor has a freaking really tall light on all night and, you know, my trees have leaves on them. I don't see that.
There's no way that we can opt out.
No, not at
Not
all.
at this moment.
I wasn't here
We
when
have a
this-
5-year
Yeah, it's
date.
2025.
Once you've opted in, you have a 5-year window to remain in, so you can't, if you opted in 2021, I guess it was, you got until 2025 to reconsider.
Yeah, it's next year.
Yeah, I'm gonna interject my personal opinion first, is there's towns out there that are welcoming these facilities with open arms, and there's other towns that are prohibiting them. I'm on the prohibited side. I would like to see them prohibited all classes within the township. That's my personal opinion. I don't know what the majority opinion is in the town. Short of that, dealing with what we're dealing with now, where we've only prohibited class 1 and 2, and we've essentially left the door partially open to the other classes, only industrial districts, I think we should clarify it, that it's only permitted in industrial districts, attach conditions to those permitted uses, and specifically prohibit it in all other districts. Especially RA districts, because we're getting a lot of applications and people are
Yeah.
somehow making an argument that it's an agricultural use, which it's not.
Yeah, I agree.
And
Like Tower Avenue
it should be
says.
Yes,
listed
yeah,
as
that's
a prohibited use. That would be my suggestion. I don't know how the township committee feels about it, I haven't spoken to them about it.
I agree, and I also like that Barbara's buffer. I mean, look at the buffers we were able to get for the solar field. I would want something like
Yeah.
that as a requirement.
Real quick, Jim, on that one, because you were there at the meeting too, the same as I was, there was a discussion that came up that the trees had to be a minimum of 4 feet. But at that point, it wasn't decided whether it was from the bottom of the ball, you know, before it was planted at 4 feet, or was that from the ground? And it never was decided that I heard what there were, you know, where was it
Well,
measured from?
You know, if that tree gets planted
Right.
and that ball is a foot,
Right.
and then it's only 3, in my mind, that's a violation.
Well, I understand that, but it never got officially announced. And I was just curious, because I thought maybe it happened and I missed it, so I was asking.
Well,
My
then
understanding is they measure from the root ball
Up.
up.
Yeah, there's a standardized,
It's industry
Well, then-
standard.
industry
Okay.
standard, yeah.
From the bottom of the root ball or the top of the root
No,
ball?
top of the
Top of the
Okay,
ball.
well, then that was.
That would make sense, but the question was raised by one of the zoning board officials, and no one can answer.
Well, okay, I don't do the inspections, but my assumption is you measure it after it's been installed.
Well, that
So they
makes
got-
sense. I mean, that would,
You plant, the root ball is at the base, you're supposed to not put the mulch around the root ball. And
Yeah, no, then that.
There's a few inches of deviation, of course, to the
Right.
root ball is it doesn't have a line on it saying measure from
Right.
here. So there's a couple inches of tolerance, but if the tree says it's supposed to be 6 feet and you planted it basically from grade
should
to
be
the
6
top of the
feet.
tree with the root ball being
Right.
approximately at grade.
well, and that's what I've always understood, but then when it was brought up at the meeting, I wasn't sure, and it wasn't answered. I know when the question was asked.
I can talk to our inspectors, because we do the inspections for the township, and I'm pretty sure we would measure, once the tree is in the ground, we measure from grade to the top of the tree, and we're not letting somebody say, well, our root structure of this tree is 2 feet deep, therefore we can put a 4-foot tree in.
Right. Well, that's, like I said, I'm just asking because it was brought up and it was questioned publicly, and it didn't get answered, so I wanted to see what it was.
We really need to decide what else, anything else we want to put in here. I think the idea that that it stated that cannabis facilities are prohibited in any other zone is a good idea.
Yeah.
I think that the buffer is a good idea, and I don't see any reason why there can't be specific conditional uses pertaining to lighting that strengthen it.
Yeah, I advocate for the 1,000-foot restriction on schools, and I leave it to the board.
And what about air
Residential.
scrubber, air scrubber type things, you know, to keep the odors?
That's
Yeah,
the
they
law.
have to
That-
get it.
that- yes,
That doesn't belong to me, so that's
Okay. That's a design.
statute driven,
Yeah.
and that's why. Krista, is that smell still there? I understand that there was a
No.
smell. I
There was a
understand that the
smell.
township went there and they had either needed to do something or change something, and the smell is now went away.
It's been about a month since it's been through that I've noticed.
Yes.
'Cause I asked too, it's been about a month.
Now, you're a little
Since it came
closer
through.
than I am.
Yeah.
Randomly.
I'm closer than all of you,
Yeah.
and I haven't
That's all.
smelled it since last summer.
Well, it was about a month ago
Not
it
this
came
past
through.
summer, but
So
even
it does
before.
have to do with enforcement
Right.
and
Yeah.
also,
Yep.
It's
we don't
been
even need to
handled.
mention there's
The
specific.
only thing I would caution about trying to put any requirement on odor, most of the towns do have a requirement that the class 1 cultivation and the manufacturing, those are the two that produce odors.
they're the ones actually dealing with the substance, everything else is dealing
Been
with
all
prepackaged
through
stuff. That they have the carbon filters and scrubbers in the building, it has to be enclosed. But quite a few towns did initially put in a requirement that there be no essentially odor escaping at the property line.
Right.
You're not supposed to be able to detect it. What the exact language was, and a lot of times the attorneys, they see what one town did, they say, okay, we'll copy what they did. So this got put into ordinances all over the state. And a lot of them are deleting this now. It said that the odor should not be detected by a person of reasonable odor detection abilities at the property. So it's this,
Yeah.
like, it's hard enough to control sound, there are all of those devices to do that. To measure sound from a property line, and how much sound is coming from there, but there's not like some sort of device you can put up and hold it up to the property line and say, I'm detecting X amount of particles in the air of marijuana.
Now I will say,
Bring the canine out there, the drug,
Yeah,
it
it was
gets
a
out,
drug
and
out.
there's a problem.
now I will say, Joe, real quick, to answer your question, the people, I recently talked to a lot of the residents along Lake Road and they say they still smell it. So I mean, that's just what they've said. So, I mean, this is just from personal conversations with
Yeah,
the residents.
I don't,
Who, they are much
obviously
closer
I
than
don't, so.
we are, but
I
that's what they
live a
say.
lot closer than you live, and I smell it here out of that, so I was telling Jeff, it's like, there's no rhyme or reason.
No, it's random.
You drive by there one night, and maybe it has something to do with the recycle or whatever, I don't know.
My guess is it has to do with the cycles in the growth
Right.
process, and they're probably more fragrant at other times
Yeah,
than others.
thanks.
All right, a bit of housekeeping here, Madam Chair.
Yes.
It's 5 minutes to 9, and I would propose, being there's 3 items left, that we continue past 9 o'clock to wrap up the last 3 items, so we can complete the review package.
Yes, particularly because I think a couple of them, yeah,
All
well,
right.
the first one.
As long as it'll go past 11 o'clock.
Or past 10, might be, but anyway.
Okay.
Okay, we done with cannabis, we basically, I think the way it's worded is good, maybe adding
All other
prohibited in
things.
other zones.
Additional conditioning standards, and not just saying they're permitted in industrial districts, but prohibited in all other districts.
Yeah, right. Okay. Master plan should reflect the current redevelopment plan for the Meredith Farms property. Township was provided with funds to remediate contamination on this former poultry processing facility site, with the condition that the site be used as an economic development project with the goal of providing local employment. Current plans for the site call for a food center on the site. So what actually when you say it should reflect the current redevelopment, it
This
should
is-
mention it specifically. isn't
This specifically, this section on redevelopment recommendations is not necessarily, we're recommending changes to a redevelopment plan, or say you should examine that area for redevelopment. It's one of the requirements for a re-examination report. It's letter E under the 6 things you're required to do in a re-exam. The important ones are the specific changes recommended for master plan or land development regulations. Those are the ones that have potential policy teeth that are then supposed to get implemented into an ordinance. This is specifically, it says, the recommendations of the planning board concerning the incorporation of redevelopment plans adopted pursuant to the local redevelopment and housing law into the land use plan element of the municipal master plan, and recommended changes, if any, in the local development regulations necessary to effectuate the redevelopment plans of the municipality. So this is just saying basically this section is to list where you have current redevelopment areas, so that your master plan reflects that those are redevelopment areas with redevelopment plans.
Right.
And
So right now
it's
there's-
attached to the money we got from US EPA. That was all part of that requirement. I got concerns about the very last sentence. The current plan for the site calls for a food.
Yeah, that
food
doesn't
center.
have to be in there if you don't want it.
I don't, there is no current plan.
Yeah, I don't even know that the redevelopment agreement is even valid, because
Valid.
both sides have been in severe default
Which is a whole
of the
nother
entire
question.
agreement.
Yep.
I think
Which is a whole
anything
nother
that gets
question.
built there, and now the new owner tries to fall back on that agreement, can be challenged, because in my opinion, the entire agreement is void, because both parties defaulted under several provisions of that contract.
And I don't
That I
disagree
don't
with
know any
Jim.
further specifics on.
I
There
don't
is-
disagree with Jim on the parties of the agreement. But what I do know to be true is the application had the redevelopment attached, the funding application had it attached to it to identify it as a site.
Oh, yeah, but what I'm saying is that no, you're right, the funding for that site was provided
Redevelopment.
based on those plans.
Yeah.
The two parties that were supposed to
Both
execute
Nicolette,
that
yeah.
their
Agreed.
duties did not.
Right.
And so I think that contract is just completely void.
And
So
that's,
that might void a developer's agreement with the EDA requirement that this be a job generator essentially in some capacity is still.
exactly, that's exactly where I'm going. Whether the redevelopment plan, as we know with Stankin Galetta, will hold up is a whole nother question. But we as a township went to the feds to get the money under the preset that it was a redevelopment. So I think that's what the piece that keeps it in there. But I think you're right, once they look at it, the attorneys are gonna have a problem with it. And there is no current plan for a food processing plant, and I think that last sentence should come out.
Okay.
Okay.
That's fine. I think that's all, we agree with that. Anything to add or change? Otherwise, we'll go on to 29. Property located between South Clark Street and Route 55 on the border with Clayton Township was designated in need of redevelopment in 2009. No redevelopment of this site has occurred since the designation. Township should review the current redevelopment plan to determine if proposed development is feasible.
Sounds reasonable.
Yeah, that's fairly straightforward, definitely should be looked at again. It sounds like it wasn't
That
ideal
was part of
site.
the builder remedy, that was shocking redevelopment of his many dreams of placing affordable housing in many different locations.
Who's plan?
Shocking.
When the town was sued under the builder remedy lawsuit, he came with numerous locations, and that was one of the sites, and through the courts, it was agreed that that would be a redevelopment site, because that was one of his dreams of putting it there, because he was gonna get water and sewer from Clayton, which was never gonna happen.
Right.
But, so, the real question is that property today a redevelopment, a good redevelopment location, is really the question.
Yeah.
I mean, it remains designated an area in need of redevelopment, and therefore, at any time, the township can revise and amend a redevelopment plan for that area.
I don't know that necessarily needs to be looked at again. I think that what Joe's point is, I mean, that's up to the committee if they want to expend the funds,
If
but
the
if
committee
we're not.
wants to do away with it, let them do away with it. I'm just giving you a history of how did it get to be a redevelopment site.
So what funds would have to be expended to?
Well, whatever the engineering firm.
Just like the one at Fazio was done, I mean, I forget what the total was, what, 16,000? Or something along those lines, I think is where it totaled out to the residents' month.
Frankly, no study needs to be done there. Once it's designated in need of redevelopment, unless conditions change on the property, it remains designated as an area in need of redevelopment. But you have to have a plan for
You have to have a
redevelopment, and
plan, right.
there is a plan. I don't know if I've actually even seen the plan, but I assume there is a redevelopment plan there, probably associated with the former proposed housing there. And clearly nothing's happened there, so we're simply suggesting that's a redevelopment area, and since nothing's happened in 15, 16 years now, the township can review it and say, do we want to change this plan to something even more feasible?
How difficult is it to rescind that redevelopment area?
It's one ordinance,
Okay.
or you might be able to rescind by resolution, or probably ordinance or.
No major study.
No, you don't have to have a study to rescind.
Okay.
Can I just ask a question real quick? So there's a lot of defunct and burned down now buildings along Delsey Drive in between Franklinville and Malaga. I mean, if anywhere in the township, I think, could use a little redevelopment. Look, this is me who was Mr. Anti-Redevelopment Zone. But if there's an area of the township that I think could use a little polishing up, just even for the civic pride of Franklin Township, it would be those lots along Delsey Drive in between Franklin Township and Malaga. I'm just throwing that out there.
Corridor could use a lot.
Yeah, the corridor could
Well, that
certainly
would
use
be
a lot.
number 30 for next
That's
week.
literally-
Oh, is it? Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't even read it. I didn't
4 or
wear my
5
glasses.
years ago,
Maybe.
4 or 5 years ago, Chris, we looked into having what's called a corridor review. And we actually hired a person. Right, Joe?
Yeah.
No names. That was
Oh, I give you a name.
ahead of the department to review all these dilapidated structures along 40 and 47, which technically everyone says is the gateway into our community as people come from other towns. And you're supposed to put your best face forward, and we're not. Nothing has happened.
So money was spent and it fell through, is what you're
Well,
saying?
we hired someone and nothing really happened. and it was maybe a 1-year program and it just went away.
So it would be better to figure out where it dropped and eliminate that individual and put somebody in there who
Well,
actually.
the goal and the hope was that our zoning officer would inspect these properties
And you
we
see where
could
we're
possibly tear them down at the owner's expense and then put a lien on the property. That's still our goal.
Right.
I'll say I was not involved in that process at all.
Me neither.
Nothing.
I wasn't
But
either.
my way, or as far as I know, no one at CME has been involved in that
Right.
process.
Chris, how could an area be an area in need of redevelopment if it's never been developed in its history?
That is, there's the criteria, and I'll put it this way, was there 8 or 9 criteria? Technically, the property only needs to meet one of those criteria, but yes, the spirit of the original law, which prior to being called the Local Redevelopment and Housing Law, was the Blighted Properties Act, and the original intent of the law, going back to like the 1940s, was blighted properties and removing those, so the urban renewal projects.
Because the area that you just discussed prior to the 47 corridor is undeveloped and it's never been developed, but you're declaring it, or this, it's an area of redevelopment. Why?
The
There
term
was something
redevelopment
in
is a bit of a misnomer, because there is criteria C under the redevelopment
Right.
law as land that has been vacant for a period of 10 years or greater.
Correct.
So the way most people think of redevelopment, what we're recommending here essentially is the way redevelopment properly functioning, sort of the way that the state intended it on a larger basis, is supposed to be focused on properties that were developed in the past and are now, run down and dilapidated and blighted.
Right, but
That's criteria A, B, D, E. Forget what F is. I think F is.
Are you
C
talking
talks about vacant land, I believe it had a job, the creation of jobs and all that type of stuff tied to it.
Well, C is just land that's either owned by the municipality or a redevelopment entity, or has been vacant for a period of 10 years and is unlikely to be developed through the instrumentality of private capital alone. So that does get applied to parcels that have been vacant and have never been developed in the past.
You'd be talking about farms.
Yep, there are farms that have been declared areas in need of redevelopment under that criteria.
That's not true, it's false. I mean,
Anyway,
What was that again?
It's true.
Number 30.
Bring it
But
back.
the whole
30
point,
is the new stuff.
the whole point of 30 is
Our
to,
last point.
to say redevelopment as a tool of economic development should be focused on properties that were previously developed but are now underutilized. And that's exactly what you're saying. And I don't think we have a
no,
problem
that's not
with
what I'm saying, Suzanne. We were talking about open space.
Yeah, that would not apply in this case.
Are you talking along the highway on Delsey Drive?
No.
You're not?
No.
At
It's a
all?
general
No, we're
statement.
not
It's a
talking
general
about-
statement. We're not
General
saying any
statement
specific
is what
areas.
you're going with.
We're
Okay.
saying, what it says here is, the township committee should only target those areas for redevelopment that have a realistic potential to be redeveloped, that's one thing.
Right.
Or are generally free of environmental constraints, such as wetlands. Redevelopment as a tool of economic development should be focused on properties that were previously developed but are now underutilized.
All right, so.
So
there's-
so
which
So
in
there's
Malden,
different properties going down the corridor
Yes.
in 47
Right.
that are underutilized or in poor condition or whatever might fit that.
But would they be brownfield sites, like where the
They- they could be
agriculture
Consider
comes?
brownfields
So,
as well,
and
yeah.
this
So
language
go
here,
as it's coming in there.
where we say such as wetlands, I would like to see that, say where wetlands comprise over 50% of the land area, because this goes back to those two pieces that got identified in the redevelopment zone, that one was like 53 or 54% wetlands,
Yeah, there's a lot of wetlands.
and the other one was close to it. And so, and that was that was the crux of of the letter that I wanted written, and answers to why those two pieces were picked.
Yeah,
Because
why
they
they
were
were
very
chosen.
unusual pieces.
I'll put it this way, we can say this, and I've had these conversations with a couple of planning boards before, because I've done studies on properties where there's, I'll say there's a few at Pemberton that I had done before, where they have frontage on, what is it, on not Route 70, but like Pemberton, near the bypass up there. And they have commercial structures on the frontage, but then they're pretty deep, and then a lot of them in the back are wetlands. And there's a board member, I had the exact same conversation with him every time, and he used to work for DEP, and he wants to protect the wetlands. And he would say, like, why do we wanna do redevelopment here? This is all wetlands. And I'd have to remind him every single time that even if you designate something in need of redevelopment, that doesn't supersede DEP regulations, that the wetlands still have to be protected, whether it's a 50-foot, 150 or 300-foot buffer, all those regulations still apply.
Right, but if we identify a lot that is over 50% wetlands, that just automatically disqualifies it even before you get to the DEP.
Yeah, by the time you put the buffers in, there's no place to build.
All this
No, I
is
know.
recommendations
Right.
for the township to
Yeah.
consider where to look or not to look for redevelopment.
Mhm.
The state criteria are the state criteria, and they
Right.
all have to get applied individually to every single piece of property. Being first suggested or recommended by the township committee through a resolution sent to the planning board, and the planning board does their report, issues a report back to the committee, or usually it's a professional does a report, presents it to the planning board. Planning board either accepts or rejects those recommendations in part or in whole, sends it back to the committee. I don't know that we can say that we're gonna make any property that has more than 50% wetlands automatically disqualified from redevelopment, because there certainly could be circumstances where a property very easily meets multiple criteria, but happens to be that, 60% of it is wetlands, but there's still developable property along the highway frontage. I don't know that you would need to.
And the way it's worded, and they're generally free of environmental constraints such as wetlands, is not being specific, and maybe that's better in a way, because then this specific circumstance, if you have to cross the wetlands to get to the upland.
I think what also the first sentence gets at that, properties that have a realistic potential to actually be developed, or if a property is 90% wetlands, regardless of how many, if you designate it in need of redevelopment or in need of rehabilitation, do a redevelopment plan that says you can do 5,000 housing units there and a commercial warehouse. If it's all wetlands, then either DEP or Pilots is gonna say, no, you can't build there.
No, I mean, I understand that, and that one piece that was over 50%, by the time you put the buffers in, there may not be any buildable land left. But, I just wanna make sure that if some piece of property that has that kind of, environmentally sensitive areas tied to it, why are we even considering it?
Why spend the money on something that?
Yeah, we wasted $16,000 on a study on a part of the redevelopment zone that wasn't really that buildable to begin with.
It's never
Makes
quite
sense.
clear why they're
I mean, I don't really think you can regulate away that from happening. I mean, it's a purview of the township committee. You can make suggestions, but you can't, put a regulation that says you can't do this, like, we don't have that authority.
Well, no, I mean,
Right.
if you're saying that it's gotta be free of environmentally sensitive, top things such as wetlands, I don't know why you can't say wetlands that consist of some percentage of the
Well, no,
total parcel.
we can say whatever we want, but it's not binding, is my point,
Well, but,
The
and as
township
Chris
committee
just
can
said,
say, oh, we don't care what they say.
as Chris just said, you could have 60% wetlands in the back of an area that, but what was developable.
No, I get it, yeah,
So,
I see, yeah.
I'm not sure that we wanna be that specific at what we.
Yeah, I think this language gives you more teeth.
Yeah,
than-
it
than
gives you a.
going
Right.
specific.
I just look, I just, when we wanted to know, where did these come from? I mean, the Fazio property was
That's
the only
true.
piece that made
That's true.
sense.
That's right.
Where did these other two come from?
Now
and
we're
why?
talking about the elephant in the room.
And to be
That was said earlier, Christie, help me through that last sentence there. Properties that were previously developed, but is now underutilized. The elephant in the room is a Fazio property, so I would argue that the, previously used, other than farming, which that, I personally believe that's probably the property that's most developable. And how would your sentence of previously developed, other than section C, allow that property to be developed?
I would say, this is not changing any of the state criteria. This is just, these are recommendations to the governing body as to
What we're recommending.
incorporating existing redevelopment plans and suggestions for where you think they should consider investigating.
Okay, but we're recommending that properties that were previously developed, that sentence is what I'm having the problem with when I look at the Fazio piece, that wasn't previously developed. There wasn't a Meredith farm where they turned the electric off and
Yeah.
the waste was going down the highway. You certainly can argue that was previously developed. How can you argue that the Fazio property was previously developed? I think we boxed ourselves in with the word there.
Why does it need to be a redevelopment zone when it can be developed right now under the zoning that it has?
I mean, I don't understand why we were debating a specific piece of property
Right.
in relation to this paragraph.
It's irrelevant.
We're making a suggestion, we're saying, hey, look, you guys should probably focus on properties that have already been developed.
Right.
We're not saying you have to, we're saying.
Okay, you're not saying you
Yeah.
can't.
We're not
Okay.
saying you
All right.
can't.
This technically would not have any bearing on an actual redevelopment study. Let's say the town committee wants to ignore everything we're talking about tonight. They wanna go out and find a piece of property that's 100% wetlands, in the flood hazard area, and it's endangered species habitat, and they wanna hire somebody to do a redevelopment study there.
They can.
They can.
They can do that if they want, and they would still have to go through the same public process and meeting one of those criteria,
Okay.
and then it would
So
still be completely undevelopable regardless of what.
these are
it is.
recommendations, these are not.
These are
not items that we're
recommendations of
putting in.
where to
All right,
consider
yeah,
investing
I got
in
it,
all
I
this.
got it, that's fine. I was reading it as these were pieces of the master plan that we were putting in versus recommendations.
Well, but in any case, maybe Fazio, under this statement, that Fazio property wouldn't qualify for
Right.
as a redevelopment site, but it doesn't mean it can't be developed.
True,
And especially since.
but the
that
incentive of the
conversation was already-
redevelopment wouldn't be there.
It could still be investigated
Right.
if the township
Yeah,
wants.
true.
And if it meets one of the criteria under the.
I
missed the point that
investigation
this
and
was
planning board
recommendations
agrees, the township really wants to, they can still.
Something you're putting in the master plan.
And it'll still qualify under the state regulations, because it's not been developed in 10 years. What do we do next? Anything?
Next would be, one of the recommendations you guys had a couple of months ago was to sort of organize the recommendations by like categories. I'm gonna do that as well as make the updates we sent today. Put this together, all together, because this is the recommendations, there's the other chapter, sort of, I don't call them chapters really, the other sections that are, 20, 30 pages long of all the census stuff. They'll all go together in one document with the other maps that I put together. And then it becomes a full report, and hopefully within, pretty soon, we can take this to the full planning board for their consideration.
Will you have to go through all of this again?
It all depends on how long the planning board wants to discuss it. Part of the purpose of having a subcommittee, having all these discussions, is so that once it goes to the planning board, we have multiple members of the planning board in this body, we can all say, we worked on this for a while, we think, this is really what we wanna do. Does anybody else have questions or comments, and, maybe there's another tweak here or there, but then we're all already on the same page, and we've already had these discussions, and the board can adopt it, and then the ball is in the township committee's hands in terms of, okay, the planning board has said these are the changes we wanna see in the ordinance, let's get moving.
Yeah, I just want to make a quick comment, I think everybody on this board's aware of it, but for any members of the public, just because we're making motions, we're voting on things, just because we're making a recommendation, does not mean in any form or fashion that that's gonna be what's adopted by the township committee. The township committee could do a Nancy Pelosi and rip all of our recommendations up, so I don't want anybody to be surprised if something that we said doesn't come to fruition, so.
And it has to be in the form of a zoning ordinance change or
Right.
a new ordinance adopted, and that's another whole
It's a
endeavor.
peculiarity to New Jersey land use law, in that the planning board adopts the master plan, township committee adopts the zoning ordinance, but the zoning ordinance is required by law to be substantially consistent with the master plan, but the township's not obligated to do exactly what the master plan says.
Right.
So,
Chris, do you think this committee should meet again, or not necessarily, before you present to the planning board?
Why
I don't know
don't
if
he
that's
submit a
necessary.
draft for review and see if anybody wants, we went through the entire package, let's review it before we plan another meeting. Because we may be ready to submit at this point.
yeah, I don't think there's, if I send you a draft, say, next week of the full thing, there's no point to having another meeting, get everyone out here just to say, yeah, this looks good, thanks, let's go home now.
That's what I'm saying, let's review the draft. and
So if
see.
anybody has a question or about wording or something in the final draft, they can communicate directly to you.
Yes, and then there's also, so this will go through, that it has to be, there's public notice, this will be in the paper, and there'll be a copy of the plan in the clerk's office, as well as you'll all have copies of the plan, the board members will have copies of the plan. So there still will be, the planning board has the public hearing on the full plan, and the full planning board gets to make comments, as well as the public gets to make comments at that time as well. So if there's additional changes, they can still be made. It's not that once this board says we're not meeting anymore, this is it, that there's still,
Yeah, there's still work to be done.
Oh, yeah.
I'm assuming at least a few other planning board members will have a question or comment or two.
So there'll be other multiple opportunities for input.
So we do not need to set a meeting date, and we can,
We can pencil one in case,
But I don't think we need to have a hard date of everyone.
Keep your third Wednesday open in case. But we don't need to schedule a meeting because we just decided how we'll deal with this. I think we've done a very good job with this, and I think Chris has done a wonderful job.
Thank you, everybody, for your time, and thanks for letting us be here.
Yeah.
Can it be posted on the website, before the planning board meeting so that the public has an opportunity to read it? Because it's gonna be a long document and coming to town hall.
It'll
One
go
at a
on the website, I would think. No
Well,
reason why-
48 hours
Before the
before.
hearing.
But state law says it has to be on file in the clerk's office 10 days ahead, and I'm pretty sure that it would not be hard to ask the township to post it on the website as well.
That would make it easier for the residents.
They've got all their other
to-
planning documents on the website, I'm sure they can post it.
Thank you.
Okay, there was one thing that occurred in the past, and I don't know what, on the notifications, the township did an ordinance, and there was a certain requirement that the county planning office needed to be notified, and the ordinance had to be done a second time because the county wasn't notified. Does this master plan at the planning board level hit that requirement that we have to notify certain, other than the typical legal notification through the paper, do we have things where we have to notify the planning office at the county level of a master plan change at the planning board level, not at the township
So
level?
Chris is nodding his head, yes,
Yeah.
so we would, and I know that there are certain.
I just wanna, I don't wanna do it twice.
Right, no, so I will definitely work with whenever Chris has that final, draft, and I will make sure that we follow whatever notice needs to be
Yeah, we
made.
got
I'll work with Christine
Yep.
to
Pretty
make
sure
that-
it's noticed in the paper, whatever
Right.
paper of record. Has to be sent to the county, probably we gotta send it to the Pinelands as well.
Okay, yeah, there's another.
Although Pinelands only has jurisdiction over ultimate ordinance changes, they don't have
Possibly
any
DEP,
jurisdiction over master plan. I'm pretty sure we have to send it to them as a courtesy. And I think we have to send it to DCA, Office of Planning Advocacy as well.
I'll have a
After it's
checklist,
adopted by
I'll
the
have a
planning.
checklist to Christine.
Right, I just
I
wanna make
think we
sure
have to
all
send
the
it before it's
areas are.
adopted, just so that they have it, but they,
Oh, you have to send it before it's.
the county and the state, I've never seen them actually make comments on anybody's plan, they just say, we've received it, thank you. But they do have to go out. Yeah, I think it's 2 copies have to go to Gloucester County, and then a copy or maybe 2 copies have to be in the clerk's office and notice in the paper at least 10 days ahead of time.
I just don't wanna have to do it twice.
No,
because
we'll
somebody
have a
didn't
whole
get it.
checklist, we'll make sure everything is done, first time.
Because then we'll have to pay the legal fees a second time, and I don't wanna do that.
Yeah, we'll definitely get it done the right the first time, so no problem.
Did you expect any less?
No, I wouldn't.
Well, look, we only spent 20 more minutes, and I think we did a great job.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Suzanne.
Yeah.
Up to all of you.
Thank you.
No.